Chapter 449. Some things probably couldn't stand up to careful consideration or association. Regardless of whether the truth was really as Lu Chen thought, once he thought of the huge and strangely shaped statue in front of him and the white tiger statue he saw on the ground of the Immortal City, he immediately felt that everything seemed to be similar. Originally, the white tiger statue in the Immortal City was tall, mighty, and imposing. It was already extremely shocking, and when Lu Chen saw it that day, he couldn't help but exclaim in admiration in his heart. At the same time, he felt nostalgic like many people. He really didn't know what kind of powerful ancient race was able to build such a magnificent statue. Now that he recalled, Lu Chen remembered more details. Although his first impression at that time was that the white tiger statue was majestic and shocking, in fact, the lower half of the statue was not standing. Lu Chen carefully recalled and confirmed that he really didn't see the feet of the white tiger statue. At that time, most people thought that the white tiger was probably a crouching tiger, a ferocious tiger statue lying on the ground with unparalleled majesty. Even if they didn't see the four legs directly, it was probably the technique used when the statue was carved, so they didn't pay too much attention. However, at this moment, standing in the underground city and looking at the scene in front of him, Lu Chen realized that perhaps many people in the Immortal City were wrong. Deep underground, there was the other half of the white tiger statue here. The white tiger statue seemed to have passed through two worlds, stepping on both sides of the river. It was unfathomable and unimaginable. Lu Chen looked at the white tiger statue for a long time. Then, he suddenly turned around and looked at the surrounding streets. The statues each occupied half, then what about the city in front of him? Did these countless tall and silent houses have anything to do with the Immortal City on the surface? Huff, huff, just as Lu Chen was staring at the eerily silent streets and houses in a daze, he suddenly heard a strange sound coming from the side. He turned around to take a look and was stunned for a moment. It was unknown when Atu had been strolling along the side, sniffing and sniffing along the way. He walked to the side of the huge statue in the center of the city. He raised his head and looked up, as if he was very surprised by such a huge statue, and also a little shocked. Then, Atsu rubbed its body on the half-statue and smelled it. Finally, it found a corner and lifted one of its legs to pee for a while. Lu Chen was speechless for a moment. Seeing that Atsu seemed to be refreshed after peeing, he wanted to say something but stopped. He looked up at the towering statue and was a little worried that he and Atsu would suddenly be crushed to death. Fortunately, it seemed that this statue was temporarily not efficacious, or the unusually lifelike and breathtaking parts were on the ground of the Immortal City, making people feel more comfortable. Don't do this in the future. Lu Chen touched Atsu's head and said, no matter what, you still have to respect such a huge statue. It was unknown whether Atsu understood or not. It just raised its head and looked at him. After a moment, it suddenly turned its head to look at the other side of the city and let out a low roar. There was hostility and vigilance in that roar, as if it had discovered something. Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and looked in the direction that Atsu was looking at. Then, he discovered that in this huge cave that was shrouded in blood-red light, other than the cave on the mountain wall that he had just come down from, there were 7 or 8 similar caves on the mountain wall. There was also a stone staircase that connected to this underground city. And in the direction that Atsu was looking at, a figure suddenly flashed and walked out of a cave on the mountain wall. Lu Chen's expression changed slightly, and he reacted almost immediately. He stretched out his hand and pulled Atsu. His body bent down and rolled from the middle of the road to the bottom of a house on the side of the street. He used the high wall to hide his body. After a moment, Atsu also ran over quietly. At this time, in this place, who would suddenly appear? Lu Chen was not a god. Of course, he did not know what was happening outside at this moment. However, years of being a shadow had long made him develop the habit of putting self-preservation first. After making sure that he and Atsu were hiding, he slowly poked his head out and looked in that direction from afar. On the mountain wall in the distance, 2 figures appeared one after another. They stood at the top of the cave entrance and looked down at the city below. They seemed to be talking to each other, and then they walked down together. Lu Chen glanced around again. Looking at the empty street, there was a little doubt in his eyes. After that, he continued to observe the situation over there. But after a while, he suddenly frowned because he found that the two people seemed to be walking in his direction all the way. Have I been discovered? Or is there another reason? Lu Chen pondered for a moment, but he looked back at the tall and strange statue. At this moment, he and Atsu were almost under this tall statue, and this place was vaguely the center of this city in the catacombs. Almost all the streets led here. He hesitated for a moment, gently touched Atsu who was lying obediently beside him, and then pointed to the house next to them. After that, he gently got up, bent down, and quietly walked into the door. This house looked tall and complete, with a building and a courtyard. After entering, Lu Chen even found that there was a well in the middle of the courtyard. He walked over and took a look, and then found that there was no trace of water at the bottom. It had become a dry well. He looked around. Being in this house that was much taller than ordinary people, there was indeed a sense of oppression and insignificance. Perhaps the original people who lived here were unusually tall. But now was not the time to think about these things. He called Atsu over, hid behind the door, and then looked out through the very small gap in the door. After an unknown amount of time, a series of footsteps came from afar, getting closer and closer. Atsu was lying on the ground behind Lu Chen, faintly shaking its tail uneasily. Lu Chen turned his head and smiled at it. He reached out and patted Atsu's head, as if to comfort it, and then put his finger on his lips to make a silent gesture. Atsu obediently lowered its head and did not move. Lu Chen looked out again through the small gap in the door. Not long after, two figures finally appeared in his sight. It seemed like they didn't live in this city, because they were ordinary humans like Lu Chen. They were men of similar height and stature. And one of them, Lu Chen even felt that it was a little familiar. After a moment, Lu Chen recognized that person. Because he had seen him a few days ago, it was the chef from the Three Li Xiang Tavern. Lu Chen was slightly shocked. At this moment, the chef seemed to have changed into a different person. He had a calm temperament, and his eyes were sharp. He was obviously a capable and powerful character. To be able to suddenly appear from the tavern in this strange underground city, needless to say, this chef was obviously strange. Lu Chen laughed coldly in his heart, and then shifted his gaze to the man standing beside the chef. At this moment, he heard the footsteps outside suddenly stop, and the man that he did not know stopped under the statue. He looked a little unhappy and asked, "You brought me so far underground, where is Elder Gui?" Chapter 450. Elder Gui. Lu Chen, who was hiding behind the door, did not move at all. Even his breathing did not become erratic or hurried. Only his pupils suddenly constricted. When he looked at the two people outside through the gap of the door, there was a deep and unfathomable glow in his eyes. On the street outside the house, under the huge statue, the mysterious chef who was questioned just now seemed to be very polite to the person who asked the question. He said, "Hall Master Fan, you've just arrived here, so you shouldn't be familiar with the rules here. In the Immortal City, it's really difficult for our god's sect to move forward, so we have to be careful. As for Elder Gui, look, am I not prepared to bring you to meet him?" The man who was addressed as Hall Master Fan was naturally Fan Tue, the leader of the Western Continent Demon Church who had just arrived in the Immortal City. After hearing the chef's words, he shook his head and said, "Looking at your attitude, even if I follow you there, I will not be able to meet Elder Gui immediately. Perhaps there will be a few more checkpoints to verify my identity, purpose, and so on." Is that so? The chef did not deny it. He only hesitated for a moment before saying apologetically, "Hall Master Fan, you are wise. Although my mission is to bring you there, and there will naturally be people to receive you later, I also do not know how to proceed after that. In my opinion, I will most likely have to trouble Hall Master Fan again. I hope you can understand. He said these words very politely and very sincerely. His attitude was really indescribable. Fan Tui was unhappy. After all, he was a powerful figure in the Western continent. Now that he had risked his life to enter the Immortal City, he was treated like a thief and guarded against. How could he feel good? However, facing this humble and gentle chef, he couldn't lose his temper. He could only sigh and say, could it be that the Floating Clouds Agency is really so scary? The chef nodded and said, yes. Fuyunji has been fighting with our god sect for decades. Their methods are vicious and vicious. It can even be said that they are unscrupulous. Everyone in the world scolds our divine sect for being evil and harming people, and sees us as enemies. But in fact, in these decades of battles, the actions of those people in Fuyunji are even worse than our divine sect. Fan Tui snorted. Clearly, he had no objections to Chef's words. He nodded and said, it's all that Baldi Tianlan's doing. Perfected Lord Tianlan's prestige was illustrious and his name had shaken the world for decades. The most eye-catching characteristic of him was his unswerving determination to fight the evil cult to the death. To the devil cult, that damn Baldi from Tianlong Mountain was indeed a great enemy of life and death, a blood feud as deep as the sea, the gnashing of teeth was also innumerable. Chef smiled bitterly, a trace of helplessness flashed across his eyes. There was a bit of heartache and desolation of being helpless towards that person even though they hated him to the core. Then, he said, the Immortal City is the center of the world's cultivation world. If one wants to achieve something, the Immortal City is a place that all militarists must fight for. However, in this world now, Xianxia is the only one with great influence, occupying places like the Immortal City and Tianlong Mountain, which have dragon veins of fate. Until now, they have been operating here for hundreds of years. Not to mention other things, just in this Immortal City alone, there are countless spies of Xianxia and Fuyunji. There are many experts, and there are also the 6 old thieves from the top of Tianlong Mountain. If we really want to fight them head-on, our divine sect is really much weaker now. Fan Tui was slightly surprised and took a few more glances at the chef in front of him. He said, you actually have such a clear understanding of the current situation. It seems like our divine sect also has many hidden talents in the Immortal City. Chef smiled and said, Hall Master Fan, you're too kind. I'm just a nobody under Elder Ghost, not worth mentioning. At most, I've just stayed in the Immortal City for a long time and saw a little more things, so naturally I know a little more, that's all. However, to be honest, now that the enemy is strong, and Fuyunji and Tianlan see Elder Ghost as a thorn in their side, they must get rid of him as soon as possible. However, if Elder Ghost is slightly careless and reveals a little of his whereabouts, he will definitely attract a large number of experts to surround and kill him. We really cannot be careless. After all, now that the divine sect is weak, the great responsibility of prosperity rests on Elder Ghost's shoulders. Fan Tui was silent for a long time. Then, he let out a long sigh, flicked his sleeves, and said sadly, the divine sect has fallen to such a state, what more can I say? I don't have to be calculative about these small matters. Bring me there. I hope that I can meet Elder Ghost as soon as possible and discuss the important matter that can revive the divine sect and restore the glory of our ancestors. Chef replied solemnly, yes, thank you for your understanding, Hall Master Fan. Please follow me, this way. As he spoke, he led Fan Tui forward, went around the huge statue, and walked towards the street in front. Looking at the direction they were walking in, it seemed like they wanted to pass through this empty underground city and walk to the other end, to a place that also had a staircase cave. Only when the two of them were far away did Lu Chen slowly stand up and walk out from behind the door. He first looked around, and after confirming that there was no one around, he looked at the 2 demons from the devil sect who were gradually walking further away. He frowned and fell into deep thought. Elder Ghost? The important matter that could revive the divine sect? As a shadow who had been hiding in the Devil's Sect for 10 years, Lu Chen almost immediately caught the two most important points in the long pile of words that the two of them had said just now. As for the other words about how Fuyunji was even more vicious than the Devil's Sect, he just ignored them and pretended that he did not hear them. Were these words true? There was a slight possibility. Perhaps from the point of view of the two demons from the Devil's Sect, it was most likely true. However, Lu Chen did not care about these at all. It was not like he had not seen some of the vicious methods in the past. After thinking for a while, his face gradually turned solemn. He had never seen Elder Ghost before. It had been like this since 10 years ago when he was in the Devil's Sect. That person was the most mysterious person among all the elders in the Devil's Sect. Even in the early days, the people in Fuyunji had doubted whether this Elder Ghost really existed or if it was just a fabricated excuse by the Devil's Sect to boast about their own strength. But in the recent 10 years, the existence of Elder Ghost was already an unquestionable fact. If there was not this remaining Elder Ghost to preside over the overall situation, the Devil's Sect would have long been torn apart and drowned in the dust of the past by Fuyunji. This person was just like what the cook said, Fuyunji must get rid of him as soon as possible. Elder Ghost must die. No choice but to die. Other than that, there was still that important matter. The last important matter that could revive the Divine Sect and even restore the glory of the ancestors of the Divine Sect was the God-vanquishing incantation in the Battle of the Barren Valley 10 years ago. In that grand ceremony, there was once a person who witnessed the entire process and then personally sent everyone in the Barren Valley to hell. After so many years, that earth-shattering scene still lingered in Lu Chen's mind. That was the real power of heaven and earth. That was the power that could really change everything in the world. The Devil's Sect had real ability, they were not just talking. Looking at the back of the two people in the distance, Lu Chen hesitated for a moment. After a while, he still greeted Atsu and then quietly followed up. Even though there was danger ahead, but he still had to face it, for this imperfect human world. Chapter 451. The long street was very long and there was still a long way to go to the mountain wall at the far end. Lu Chen brought Atsu and followed behind the two evil faction sorcerers, cautiously following along the way to ensure that they would not be discovered by the two. The round blood moon on the dome was still faintly discernible floating in the sky, the red light spilled down, covering every corner of this underground city. It looked like a bloody city. And the figures traversing through the blood light also looked like they were walking in a sea of blood. After following them for a while, Lu Chen suddenly felt a little strange in his heart. The two people in front of him were still walking at a steady pace, even though the road ahead seemed to be quite far away. Generally speaking, at this distance, if there was no reason, like chatting and the like, the cultivators with cultivation skills would usually use their powers and speed up and quickly fly over. But right now Lu Chen looked from afar, the two people's walking speed was very slow and they did not seem to be talking to each other, they were just walking slowly. Why was that? Could it be that they just liked to walk slowly? This answer was somewhat unacceptable, especially in this underground labyrinth city. The two evil faction demons obviously had urgent matters to attend to. They still had to meet the legendary mysterious ghost elder. No matter what, there seemed to be no reason to procrastinate like this. Lu Chen pondered for a moment, turned his head and looked around. Other than those tall houses and empty streets, there was only that ubiquitous blood-red light. Other than that, there was nothing unusual. Could it be that there is a problem with the red light here? Lu Chen almost thought of this at the first moment. After a moment of hesitation, he called Atsu and flashed into an empty house at the side. With the surrounding high walls as cover, naturally he was not afraid of being discovered by the two evil faction sorcerers. Lu Chen straightened his body. After thinking for a moment, he tried to stretch out his hand, 5 fingers clenched. At the same time, a little black flame appeared in his eyes. The surroundings were quiet, the situation where the blood-red light might obstruct his powers did not occur, which made him heave a sigh of relief. After all, right now he was in a dangerous place. If his powers were to be obstructed, then he would really be dead. However, Before he had the time to put away his cultivation method, the small cluster of dark flames that was slowly lighting up in his palm suddenly made a whoosh sound, as if it was facing the wind. It suddenly expanded outwards, directly becoming more than 10 times bigger, turning into a ball of dark fire that was almost as big as a person's head, burning fiercely on his palm. Atsu was shocked, abruptly retreated 2 steps to the side. And Lu Chen was also taken aback. His face revealed a stunned expression. When he was experimenting with the spell just now, he didn't use any more magic power. Everything was the same as usual. However, the black fire that suddenly grew in size before him seemed to have increased his magic power tenfold in one night. His cultivation and magic power had already increased by 10 times in one night. Of course, Lu Chen did not believe this at all. He knew his own situation best. Although he often did not slack off in his daily cultivation, this strange power that originated from the curse of the black fire, through cultivation, did not increase very quickly. He even made a comparison. When he killed some powerful cultivators and life forms, the method of absorbing the aura of dead spirits gave the black fire a boost. Instead, it was faster than the speed of his daily cultivation. This was an extremely evil and strange technique. Lu Chen could not be clearer about the power of the black flames in his body. At the same time, he could also clearly determine that the black flames in his body were definitely not as powerful as they were now. So why did it suddenly increase by 10 times overnight? Lu Chen slowly loosened his palm, the black fire in his eyes slowly disappeared, and then the large ball of black fire that was burning in his hand also gradually extinguished, disappearing in midair. The surroundings were very quiet. There was not the slightest sound, as far as the eye could see, except for the blood-red light. There was still nothing out of the ordinary. Lu Chen frowned, looked up at the sky, as if he had encountered a great problem in his heart. After thinking for a while, he suddenly stretched out his right palm, and then stared at the center of his palm, began to circulate his power. In the depths of his chi sea, the withered and broken 5 elements disc slowly trembled. After a while, as if it was driven by some kind of power, it gradually turned over, revealing its dark side. In a moment, black fire suddenly appeared in both of Lu Chen's eyes. Almost at the same time, his right palm suddenly trembled, and a huge ball of fire spewed out from his palm with a muffled bang, several times larger than before, almost half the size of a person. In front of Lu Chen, the countless blood-red light around him, madly burning. There was no heat, no luster. The dark light was like a horrifying distorted abyss, ready to swallow everything around it, burning here. Lu Chen's expression changed slightly. Suddenly his body flashed. The next moment, he was already beside the main entrance, looking at the stone statue erected there. He directly pressed his hand on it. The black fire seemed to dim for a moment, along with the rotation of his palm, disappeared from sight, but the next moment, the black fire suddenly appeared on the other side of the stone statue. At the same time, from many hard parts of the stone statue, at the same time, traces of black fire appeared. As if in that instant, the black fire had already entangled the stone statue, seeped into the stone statue, and then did not extinguish, still burning. After a moment, a low muffled sound came out from the stone statue. Under Lu Chen's gaze, and Atsu's astonished gaze, that stone statue suddenly turned from a complete piece of stone into numerous tiny sand particles, and just like that, it suddenly collapsed, turned into ashes in the dark fire, scattered in this empty street. In a blink, that stone statue had already disappeared from this world. And the black fire was still there, still burning in Lu Chen's palm, like a hungry beast, greedily scanning the surroundings, searching for a bloody prey. Lu Chen sighed, retracted his arm. The black fire slowly retracted. In between, the black fire twisted, as if it was still unwilling. Lu Chen raised his head, looked at the blood moon in the sky again. After a long while, he suddenly spoke, "Atsu, this blood moon is strange. It seems to have something to do with the black fire in our bodies. It did not hinder our skills. On the contrary, the black fire's power seems to have increased by more than 10 times in this place." Atsu quietly snorted. No one could tell what he was feeling. Lu Chen instead looked at the blood moon with a complicated expression, after a while said, "Hope, the evil sect finding this place, is not because of this blood moon. Let's go, Atsu, this time no matter what, we must see clearly what the evil sect is doing." Chapter 452. Stepping out of the door, Lu Chen looked forward and found that he had been tossing and turning in the house for a while, but the two people outside had not disappeared from his sight. They were still walking slowly in the distance, just that they had walked quite a distance away from when he first saw them. Obviously, during the time when he was not out, the two evil cult demons still did not use any supernatural power to increase their walking speed. They were just like two ordinary people, walking slowly in this underground city and the sky full of blood-red light. Lu Chen was really puzzled about this. He had tried it just now. This blood moon light did not have any harmful effects on his spiritual power, and even instantly increased the power of the black fire in his body by 10 times. And although the surrounding streets and houses were empty and did not look like it was inhabited by people, it was a little strange. But in fact, after being here for so long, he did not discover any danger, nor did he discover any abnormalities. So why didn't the two of them cast a spell and leave quickly? The evil cult demons had always been cautious. No matter how he looked at it, they should not be walking like this. Lu Chen shook his head, suppressed the doubts in his heart, and led Atsu to follow them again. In the middle of this, with a slight thought, he lightly tapped the ground with his foot and used a bit of his magic power. Immediately, he felt a strong force pushing his body forward. In an instant, he flew forward, and he was much faster than he usually was. That sound was probably because he used too much strength, so when his feet left the ground, it made a muffled sound. Lu Chen was startled, quickly controlled his body in the air, lightly landed to the side, rolled, and hid in a house at the side. At the same time, Atsu also quietly ran over. Lu Chen poked his head out to look ahead, and found that the two evil cult demons did not look back. It should be because they were too far away that they did not notice the strangeness behind them. Lu Chen heaved a sigh of relief, thinking that this place was really strange. Just as he was about to get up and chase after it again, he saw that although Atsu had been following him obediently, when it had free time, it would look up at the dome from time to time, carefully observing the mysterious and strange blood moon in the sky. Lu Chen pondered for a moment before he walked over and touched Atsu's head. "Atsu, what exactly are you looking for when you brought me here?" Atsu tilted his head. His eyes seemed to be a little dazed. Then, he hummed a few times in a low voice, shook his head, and went silent. Lu Chen frowned and asked tentatively, "Are you saying that you don't know now? Or could it be that you couldn't find it after coming in?" Atsu nodded. Lu Chen gave a wry smile, helplessly shook his head and said, "You have so many problems, if you do it a few more times, someone will die." Then he stood up, looked left and right, said, "Forget it, if we can't find it then we'll search slowly. Anyway, we are not in a hurry, let's follow those two and see the situation first." After speaking, he walked out. But after 2 steps, Lu Chen suddenly paused. His face seemed to be deep in thought. After a moment, he quietly muttered to himself, those two refused to use their skills and spiritual powers to walk fast. Could it be that although this place is harmless to my black fire power, but to normal cultivators, it is an obstacle? Once he thought of this, his spirit was immediately lifted. Although this thought seemed absurd, but it seemed to be able to perfectly explain the two evil cult demons' strange behavior. But Lu Chen had always been cautious, so after thinking about it, he still carefully followed behind the two and slowly pursued. He had cultivation experience, and the strange environment here could even increase his strength greatly. His speed of catching up was naturally extremely fast. If Lu Chen was not afraid of alerting the two evil cult demons, he would have caught up in the blink of an eye. However, he still maintained a distance of more than 100 feet from the two people after he finally caught up, and then slowly followed them. After walking for about half an hour, they finally passed through the underground city and arrived at the other side of the mountain wall. This made the two evil cult demons, including Lu Chen who was hiding at the back, heave a sigh of relief. There was also a stone staircase on the mountain wall here, leading to a cave in the middle. Separated by such a distance, Lu Chen relied on his sharp hearing and heard Chef say, "Hall Master, after going through that tunnel, we will almost reach the other district. The person who will receive us is there. If there are no other accidents, you should be able to see Elder Ghost very soon." The other person nodded and said, "That's good, let's go quickly. That blood moon here is eerie and strange, I always feel uncomfortable in my heart." That chef smiled and led the way up the stone stairs. Lu Chen was worried that if he followed too closely, he would be easily discovered by the two evil cult demons. After all, there was no place for him to hide at the top and bottom of the stone stairs, and he did not intend to expose himself so quickly, so he could only hide at his original position and did not dare to move rashly. Just like that, he watched as the two people walked up the stone stairs and then entered that cave. Lu Chen jumped out from his hiding place and ran towards that stone stairs. Atsu followed behind him. In a few steps they reached the side of the stone stairs and then dashed up. Lu Chen was somewhat worried that he would lose track of those two people. He secretly exerted strength in his legs, and a black flame flashed in his eyes. Suddenly, he took a step forward, and his body suddenly soared into the air. With a "hoo" sound, he actually crossed more than 20 stone steps. He was as light as a swallow, and it was astonishing. Lu Chen was also a little surprised and inexplicably helpless at his own performance. After a bitter laugh, he ran up in quick steps and in a blink of an eye, he had already reached the entrance of the cave. When he reached the boundary, he first crouched down and hid at the entrance of the cave, then poked his head out and carefully looked inside. There was indeed a passageway inside, but it looked a little dim, and there seemed to be some twists and turns, so they couldn't see the road ahead clearly. At the same time, the figures of the two devil cult demons had already disappeared. Lu Chen frowned, his body probed inside and then walked in. At the same time, Atsu was running over from the stone stairs, about a dozen more steps to reach the entrance of the cave. He walked 2 steps in and suddenly felt his body sank. Feeling something strange, he turned around and saw that the blood-red light outside was blocked by the cave wall and could not shine on his body. It was a little dark, but there was still some light ahead. Lu Chen hesitated for a moment and still continued to walk forward. But after he walked 2 steps forward, suddenly, at the side of this cave tunnel, a fork abruptly appeared. A black figure suddenly flashed out from the shadow of the fork, a wave of bright blade light, as fast as lightning, with a biting cold murderous aura, chopped down towards Lu Chen's head. Lu Chen was taken aback, his body shook and was about to retreat, but at this critical moment, he suddenly found that the sea of energy in his body was in disorder. The black fire that he relied on the most, unexpectedly at this time, could not be activated. The blade light was dazzling. In an instant it was already in front of him. Lu Chen could even see that face behind the blade light. It was the chef from the tavern. That face that looked harmless to humans and animals, right now seemed to be filled with a fierce murderous intent. Chapter 453. The chef's face suddenly appeared in the darkness. The knife was bright and dazzling, slashing towards Lu Chen. At this critical moment, Lu Chen's body suddenly tensed up, his left leg fiercely kicked the stone wall beside him, and then borrowed the force to float backwards, trying his best to avoid this sudden sneak attack. However, as soon as he kicked, Lu Chen felt that something was wrong. The initial lightness had disappeared, and he even felt that his body was a little sluggish. He did not know if it was because he had experienced the sudden increase in his magical power for too long, and the discomfort of the sudden disappearance of this feeling was unknown. As to why this happened, Lu Chen's mind was like lightning and thunder, and very quickly, he thought of a very big possibility: the blood moon, or rather, the blood-colored moonlight that sprinkled down from the sky. After he walked into this tunnel, because of the obstruction of the mountain wall, it no longer landed on his body. It seemed that the blood moon's light was indeed strange, and only when it landed on a human body, could it stimulate the power of the black fire in Lu Chen's body to greatly increase. However, at this critical moment, although Lu Chen thought of this, he did not have much time to think, because in the flash of the knife, a smear of blood suddenly lit up. After letting out a low groan, Lu Chen staggered backwards, and at the same time, a blood stain appeared on his clothes at his waist, and blood slowly seeped out. The chef in front of him had a high level of cultivation, and the timing of his sneak attack was unusually ruthless and ruthless. It was obvious that he was not a newbie, but a veteran who had been immersed in this line of work for many years. Even Lu Chen, who was caught off guard, fell into his trap. After succeeding in one move, this chef did not hesitate, and directly rushed forward, the knife's light flipped, like a death god, and stabbed towards Lu Chen's throat, chest, abdomen, head, and other fatal points. The knife was vicious, and did not leave any leeway, wanting to kill him. However, after Lu Chen was injured by the first slash, although he was in a somewhat sorry state, he was still calm. While he staggered backwards, his reaction was quick and decisive. Even though he kept rolling and dodging, pulling the wound on his waist and causing more blood to flow out, his expression did not change in the slightest, as if the wound was not his. In just a few short exchanges, Lu Chen dodged the chef killer's 7 or 8 killing moves. At the same time, he retreated to the entrance of the tunnel. Suddenly, he seemed to step on air. With a cry of surprise, he fell backward and rolled down the stone stairs. As he tumbled, the blood-colored moonlight on the ceiling of the cave slowly fell on his body again. The chef who had chased Lu Chen to the entrance of the cave was clearly a little hesitant. However, when he saw Lu Chen's powerless appearance as he rolled on the ground, and more blood gushed out from his waist, his eyes brightened. Then, as if he had made up his mind, he clenched the knife in his hand and chased after Lu Chen. When he left the cave and rushed down the stone stairs, this chef's movement seemed to be affected, not as agile as before, as if he had stepped into a quagmire. But fortunately, his expression was still very calm, at the same time his eyes revealed a fierce glint, waved his knife towards Lu Chen. A black figure, suddenly landed behind him without a sound, stood at the entrance of the cave. That was a huge and sturdy black dog. Lu Chen was still tumbling down in a sorry state, as if he had fallen into a state of dizziness. After a while, he managed to grab onto a stone step with great difficulty. Only then did he stop, but he was already in a sorry state. However, an even more dangerous figure appeared in a blink of an eye. That chef ran down with a sharp knife in his hand, a cold smile on his face, waved his knife and slashed down, as if he had no intention of leaving him alive. Lu Chen half sat on the ground, his eyes seemed to be in a daze, as if subconsciously, he stretched out a palm to block the sharp knife. The chef killer's face revealed a sinister and disdainful smile. He could even imagine what would happen next. A large amount of blood would splatter into the air, that person's arm would be cut off, screams would resound in this underground space, and then another life would be added to his hands. Die! He roared in his heart, and slashed down with even more force. The blood-red moonlight quietly sprinkled down from above his head, floating erratically, and for a moment, the chef killer seemed to see a blur, as if the light of the blood moon was too dazzling or something else, he did not know, but there was a vague uneasiness in his heart. But all of this happened in an instant. He did not have time to think carefully, and did not have time to react. In the blink of an eye, the knife and the arm that was stretched out came into contact. Blood floated, he opened his eyes wide, ready to see blood splatter everywhere. But there was no blood. There was no bright red blood. Instead, the reflection in his eyes was a ball of black flames that had suddenly appeared. A ball of raging black flames suddenly spewed out from the arm, directly wrapping around the blade that was chopping down. In a moment, the black flames crazily rolled, and then, the originally snow-white blade suddenly curled, wrinkled, and shrunk into a ball. With a pang sound, it fell to the ground and even bounced a few times. Along with the deformed knife fell to the ground, another section of the hand that was burnt black. A putrid stench suddenly filled the air. The chef killer's eyes widened in disbelief as he looked at Lu Chen and then at his own arm. His face was full of horror, as if he had seen something unbelievable, but the truth was right in front of his eyes. That ball of black fire, that terrifying dark flame, was so powerful that it was terrifying. Not only did it directly destroy his weapon, but it even burned his palm in an instant with the force of breaking dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. Until this moment, the chef killer let out a mournful and inhuman scream, but he was after all an experienced evil sect killer. Not only did he not turn crazy and scared silly, instead he immediately made the correct judgment. His feet tapped on the floor, his body flew out, fleeing for his life towards the passage behind him. This mysterious young man in front of him was obviously powerful, although he did not know why this person was able to preserve such powerful power in the blood moon shadow, but obviously he could not fight against him, so the best way was to escape immediately. Ahead was the place where the rest of the evil sect people were waiting for support. As long as he escaped, there would definitely be hope. He tried his best to dash forward, but after dashing for several feet, his expression suddenly turned sluggish, his eyes revealed a trace of disbelief and despair. He saw a tall black dog standing at the only escape hole, looking down at him condescendingly. Its eyes were filled with disdain, as if it was looking at a dead man. Footsteps were heard behind. The chef looked back and saw Lu Chen climbing up from the ground. The black flame was still burning on his hand, and he walked up step by step. The chef's body trembled, suddenly gave a roar, and then recklessly dashed up. Wasn't it just a black dog? The chef thought viciously in his heart. A glint flashed in the black dog's eyes, reflecting the ferocious figure that was dashing over, and then it suddenly gave a roar, leapt into the air and pounced over. That figure that was like a small mountain suddenly seemed to cover the sky and press down on him. Chef looked up hurriedly, but suddenly saw that in the eyes of that huge black dog, there seemed to be a strange black flame suddenly burning, like a demon from hell baring its fangs and brandishing its claws, pouncing towards him. That was what he saw before his death, the last scene. After a moment, blood splashed up with a loud bang, splattering into the air, adding some mournfulness to this empty underground city. Chapter 454. The lifeless body rolled down the stone steps, colliding with each other along the way, rolling faster and faster. In the blood-red light, it looked somewhat miserable. Finally, it fell to the ground with a bang, and then rolled for a distance before stopping. Lu Chen stared at the body below, then turned and walked up. Atsu, who was standing not far from the cave entrance, wagged its tail at him. When Lu Chen walked past it, he smiled, stretched out his hand and patted its head. When he walked back into the cave, Lu Chen hesitated for a moment, and even turned back to look at that strange blood moon hanging in the air, his heart filled with doubt and curiosity. But among the two evil sect demons who had just chased over, one of the chefs was already dead, but the other man called Hall Leader Fan was not here. Lu Chen looked at the deep cave entrance ahead. When he was about to step inside, he suddenly stopped. His expression fluctuated, and after a while, he slowly pulled back his foot that had been stretched out. The evil cult sorcerer in front had obviously escaped. Perhaps there was someone coming to their aid. Perhaps the identity of that man surnamed Fan was also very important. Because this time he actually said that he wanted to see the evil cult's biggest leader, Elder Ghost. Maybe the opportunity to track the evil sect's biggest secret for decades was just ahead. Maybe that mysterious Elder Ghost was also there. Lu Chen clearly knew, if it was him during the Battle of the Barren Valley, he would definitely continue to pursue. For the common people? For justice and justice? Maybe, at that time in his heart, he had no doubt about it. But now? At that moment, Lu Chen seemed to suddenly ask himself this question in his heart. Atsu was about to follow in, who knew that Lu Chen suddenly stopped, couldn't help but looked at him strangely. Standing where he was, Lu Chen frowned slightly and thought for a while, then gently exhaled. Or, probably, should be, believing in those things. Just that, he was no longer a young man. He thought of even more dangers and apprehensions. The hot-blooded feeling from those years was finally gone. He looked coldly at the tunnel in front of him, then stepped back and said to Atsu, "Let's go." That man with the surname Fan took advantage of the opportunity to escape. If I'm not mistaken, there must be people from the devil cult coming to his aid. Unless we can intercept him before he finds his aid, we will inevitably fall into a bitter battle. The situation in the cave is unclear. I don't want to take the risk, Lu Qin said to Atsu as he walked up the stone stairs. Atsu didn't know if he understood or not, but he didn't reply. He just kept looking left and right at his surroundings. Lu Qin looked at the blood moon above his head, pondered for a moment and then said, "That chef is dead. The evil cult's people will only have two reactions. One is to escape, two, they have a lot of people here and their strength is strong, then they will rush over to kill us. I don't think we can stay here for long. We need to leave this place." But, how could they leave this maze-like underground city? Lu Qin looked around. After a moment, he suddenly pointed to a place in front of him and said in a deep voice, "Let's go there." Atsu raised his head and took a look. That seemed to be the place where the two demons from the devil cult came in. Since the way they came in was blocked by collapsed rocks, the place where the two demons from the devil cult came in would not also be blocked. Lu Qin thought to himself as he quickly led Atsu in that direction. At this moment, because of the strange power of the blood moon in the sky, he and Atsu's speed became abnormally fast. They quickly passed through the underground city and rushed toward the entrance of the cave that the two demons came in from. Not long after their figures entered the stone wall, a whistling sound came from the entrance of the tunnel that led to another unknown place. After a moment, more than 10 figures rushed out from inside, including Hall Master Fan Tue. However, in front of them was an empty city that was shrouded by the blood-colored moonlight. It was silent and not a single sound could be heard. Suddenly, someone exclaimed and rushed down. Following which, the others also saw the motionless corpse of the chef lying on the ground. Suddenly, there was a commotion in the crowd. Everyone ran down one after another, and a few people carefully guarded a few vital spots with a face full of vigilance. They seemed to be very experienced. The chef's death was quickly confirmed by these people. However, the murderer was not in front of them. Furthermore, it seemed that he had disappeared. This fact made many of the devil cult disciples angry and worried. After a while, one of them stood out. He was also a familiar face. It was Chen He, who had met Fan Tue in the western continent. He looked around and swept his gaze across the blood-colored city. At the same time, he said in a deep voice, "Send 2 people to escort Hall Master Fan back. Elder Ghost has something to discuss with him. The rest of you, follow me. We must find the person who followed us and see who he is." The people beside him agreed. Fan Tue walked over, nodded at him, and said, "That person seems a little strange. Be careful." Chen He's expression was solemn. He said cautiously, "I know. This is a secret location that our divine cult has only opened up after many years of operation. It is also protected by the legendary ancient relic seal. We thought that nothing would go wrong, but we did not expect someone to sneak in. We must not allow this person to live." Fan Tue nodded and left. He followed the stone steps back and quickly disappeared from this place. Chen He, who was left in the blood-colored city, frowned. After hesitating for a moment, he suddenly waved his hand and shouted, "Leave one person to guard the entrance of this cave. The rest of you will search along the streets. Split up. Once you find anything, immediately shout loudly for your companions. We must capture that thief." Someone at the side asked, "Sir, must we capture him alive?" Chen He paused for a moment before coldly saying, "Capture him alive if you can. If that person resists stubbornly, kill him." "Yes." The surrounding people all agreed and immediately separated into a large group. Like a fan, they spread out towards the underground city, searching street by street, door by door, house by house, searching in detail. The blood-colored moonlight shone on this underground cave. It was as though this place had turned into a blood-colored sea. It made one's scalp go numb. He did not follow them. He stood at the top of the stone steps and looked down at the situation below. He could clearly see the situation of his subordinates' search from where he was. They were indeed very detailed. They were like a sieve that slowly filtered through the area. However, after a while, even though they had already searched half the street, no one had found anything. The mysterious person who had followed them seemed to have suddenly disappeared from this place. He frowned and looked into the distance. Suddenly, his gaze focused. He saw the other end of this city. He saw a few tunnels that had been carved out of the mountain walls. Could he have escaped from that direction? He thought to himself. However, he did not dare to be sure. Chapter 455. After Lu Chen and Atsu walked into the passageway, they found that this passageway was different from the one behind the broken stone wall. The passageway inside was very spacious, at least twice as wide. At the same time, there were some unknown stones inlaid on both sides, emitting a white cold light, illuminating the originally dark passageway. The light of the blood moon outside could no longer reach here. Lu Chen immediately felt that his body seemed to have become heavier, which gave him a strange feeling. Turning back to look at Atsu, who was walking beside him, he found that this black dog did not seem to be out of the ordinary. The passageway was very long, most of it was straight ahead, but there were a few turns in the middle. The surroundings were very quiet, without the slightest sound, as if they were walking in the underground city shrouded by the blood moon. Lu Chen remembered very clearly that the two evil cult demons just now walked out from here. Then, if they walked from here, would they be able to find the entrance they came in from? He frowned slightly, carefully observing the situation around him as he walked forward without stopping. In the White Tiger district of the Immortal City, the towering ancient white tiger statue still stood among the many buildings as usual, watching the vicissitudes of life, only it seemed to never change. In its famous pair of eyes, following the loud bang, the light flickered as it looked towards the place where the explosion occurred. Fuyunji had lost all its face today, the casualties were heavy, and the losses were so great, it was the first time in more than 10 years. At least when Shuang recalled the past, if she counted from the famous Battle of the Barren Valley more than 10 years ago, today's mistake in being ambushed by the evil cult was the most painful failure. Since the explosion until now, her face had been very pale, and her expression had always been as cold as frost. Under that beautiful face, there seemed to be an expanding murderous aura stirring from time to time, like a ferocious beast ready to pounce and eat people at any time. Among all the people in Fuyunji who were still alive, no one dared to say a word to Shuang, and no one was willing to stay beside this woman who had obviously fallen into a frenzy. At this moment, any order she gave was like an iron law, and was immediately and decisively executed. However, no one present, including Shuang herself, knew what fate awaited Shuang after today, or perhaps even earlier. This was because the bald and burly perfected Lord Tianlan in a wide-sleeved robe was still standing at the edge of the pit, waiting silently. Under Shuaying's command, Fuyunji immediately sent many people to the bottom of the pit and began to dig. In the beginning, because of the explosion, the bottom of the crater was still very hot, which caused a lot of trouble for everyone. However, this temperature was very strange, just like the strange flame that suddenly ignited before. Although the power that erupted in an instant was abnormally terrifying, the temperature dropped extremely quickly. Therefore, after a while, the soil at the bottom of the pit that was too hot to touch immediately cooled down. Although there was still some temperature, for these cultivators, it was no longer a problem. The excavation began immediately. The first thing they did was to look for the places where the ancient ruins had been exposed. As the soil was dug up, more and more of the ancient ruins' green brick walls were revealed. However, many places were damaged. It seemed that the underground ruins had been shaken and damaged by the explosion just now. There were holes and damaged ruins everywhere. Shui Ying's expression was cold, and she personally came down to command everyone. Her eyes were like cold lightning, but there was a faint trace of anxiety and urgency in the depths of her eyes. None of the members of the Floating Clouds Agency were weak. Thus, they were able to quickly sweep away the dirt on the ground. However, they soon encountered quite a bit of trouble in clearing away the ruins. Many places were very sturdy and the terrain was narrow. It took a lot of effort to clear them out. Even so, the people in Fuyunji did not give up, and all of them worked hard. Not long after, with everyone's hard work, a corner ruin that looked like a corner of a huge ruin was revealed. However, that was all they found. There were no tunnels, no entrances, and they did not even find a place to escape to. The people in Fuyunji at the bottom of the pit looked at each other, while Shui Ying's face turned green. It should be known that Fuyunji had already sent people to carefully search the scene. After checking the charred corpses, they concluded that the evil sect Fan Tue, as well as the unknown chef, did not die here. Then where did their corpses go? Could it be that when the big explosion occurred, their physical bodies were directly burned into nothingness by the terrifying flames? Even Shui Ying and the people in Fuyunji would not believe this, let alone perfected Lord Tianlan, who was standing at the top. They, who had been fighting the evil sect for many years, instinctively knew that the two of them had escaped. Then, the question now was, where did they escape to, and where did they escape from? Shui Ying raised her head and looked up. Her gaze met with perfected Lord Tianlan, who was standing at the edge of the pit and watching them silently. The body of the Fuyunji Hall Master, who was respected by many cultivators in Immortal City and who was feared by many evil sect demons, actually trembled. She instinctively took a deep breath, and her face looked even paler. The people around her were all looking at her because they had already searched the ruins and found nothing. It seemed like they had already reached a dead end, and the two evil sect demons had actually disappeared. A deathly silence permeated the bottom of the pit. Everyone seemed to be able to hear their own heartbeats. It was also at this moment that a deep voice suddenly came from above the pit. Shui Ying, come here for a moment. Shui Ying's body trembled slightly. In that instant, she seemed to have stopped breathing. The last bit of blood on her face seemed to have disappeared. Lu Qin did not know how far and how long he had walked. This passageway was longer than he had expected. But fortunately, just as he was beginning to have doubts, he finally reached the end of this passageway. It was a round room without a door. The surroundings were all made of green stones. He stood at the door and looked inside. He found that the room was empty. There was nothing but a 3 feet wide pillar in the middle that extended from the ceiling to the ground. It looked simple and heavy, as if it was supporting the roof. He looked for a while and found nothing out of the ordinary. He then carefully walked in. Atsu also walked in behind him. After that, Lu Qin started to search the house. In the end, he searched one round and carefully examined the place. However, he did not find any mechanism or passageway to leave this place. That road seemed to have really reached the end here. Lu Qin stood where he was and frowned. A trace of doubt appeared on his face. If it really was a dead end, then where did those two evil sect demons come from? Chapter 456. In the underground city that was shrouded by the blood-red moonlight, the atmosphere was still strange and mysterious. The empty city stood erect in this underground cave, as if it was mourning the glorious history of the past, but today, only emptiness and dilapidation were left. The evil faction people still spread out and searched the city, intending to find that mysterious person who suddenly appeared. And Chen He, who was standing on a high vantage point to survey the whole situation, his expression became more and more solemn, even a little bit of worry appeared on his face. Under the suppression of Zhengxianmeng for many years, especially after the Battle of the Barren Valley 10 years ago, the divine sect had been on the decline until now. Although there were still many divine sect followers in the world who were loyal and determined to fight, but in the face of Zhengxiameng, this colossus, and Fuyunji, this ruthless organization, they were powerless and only had a little momentum. And compared to the divine sect organizations in the outside world, the divine sect that lurked in the immortal city was even more difficult. Although there was Ghost Elder's leadership and command, but for many years, everyone had been trembling with fear and trepidation, these few years to be able to develop and strengthen, and avoid the pursuit of those lackeys of Fuyunji, in fact, to a large extent, was due to this mysterious underground space that Ghost Elder opened up. No one knew how Ghost Elder discovered and opened up such a huge place, but after many years of operation, this had already become the evil sect's underground base camp, and many years of experience had already shown that, unless it was the divine sect's own people who opened up the mechanism from the inside, otherwise, the people of the outside world would not be able to discover that in the depths of this immortal city, there was actually such a mysterious underground world hidden. Sometimes, Chen-He also thought about the legend that had been passed down for many years, without any citation. This underground cave city was a part of that legendary ruins. But although this place was very strange and mysterious, but those legendary treasures, Chen-He had never discovered them. Perhaps, those legends were wrong, but the biggest danger now, was from the sudden appearance of that mysterious person of unknown origin. That person could come to this underground cave without any warning. After Chen-He knew about this, the first thing he felt was that his whole body turned cold. If the secret here was leaked, it meant that the evil sect's many years of operation might be destroyed in a day. This person must die. The catacombs were so huge that Chen-He could not find out where the outsider had come from. However, his gaze kept sweeping across the city and beyond. His eyes flickered incessantly and his expression changed a few times. Suddenly, as if he had thought of something, he leaped down and pointed at the few people nearby and shouted, You. Stop searching for now, follow me. As he spoke, he took the lead and ran forward. The three of them were startled for a moment before they followed. However, after running for a distance, Chen-He suddenly turned back to look at the chef's corpse on the other side of the stairs. After a moment of silence, he called another 5 people over, including the 4 of them. They all ran towards the tunnel that they came in from. It doesn't matter what other places have collapsed, it doesn't matter if we go back and repair them. However, there's a mechanism in that tunnel that can open the passage to the outside world. We can't afford to lose it. Chen-He whispered to the person beside him as he ran, otherwise, you and I will both die a horrible death. In that circular room, Lu Chen stood in the middle of the room, looking around, his brows knitted tightly. The black dog looked much more relaxed than Lu Chen. Not sure if it was because of the long run and the previous fight, it was tired and sprawled lazily on the ground, yawning. Lu Chen searched everywhere in the circular room, including the pillar in the middle of the room, but did not find anything suspicious. There seemed to be nothing in this empty room, other than an entrance. Nothing else could be found. Such a long path, leading to this place, and in the end, it was just such an inexplicable room? This, of course, did not make sense. Lu Chen shook his head, looked around and fell into deep thought. But after a long while, he still could not make any headway. After a while, he suddenly had a thought and looked up. He saw that the roof of the room was also made of pieces of stones, looking solid and heavy. The square stones were arranged neatly, and only near the central pillar was a circular shape dug out, allowing the pillar to pass through. Lu Chen walked around the pillar, looking carefully at all the places above his head, but he still did not find anything. This made him feel a little helpless. Just as he was worrying, he saw the stupid dog lying on the ground next to him sleepily. He could not help but feel a little annoyed, so he walked over and kicked it casually, saying, "Hey, stupid dog, we're going to be locked here soon. Do you have any idea?" Before the word "idea" left his mouth, Lu Chen's eyes suddenly lit up. After thinking for a moment, he hugged Atsu's head and dragged it to the door, saying, "Hey, stupid dog, this time it's all up to you." Atsu raised its head and looked at Lu Chen blankly. Lu Chen pointed to the ground and said in a deep voice, smell everywhere. Apart from the two of us, did anyone else pass by here? If there is, find out where they came from. Atsu wagged its tail, looking a little hesitant, but under Lu Chen's urging, it quickly lowered its head and sniffed the empty ground. In the beginning, Atsu's movements were obviously relatively slow. Its nose sniffed the ground for a long time, left and right, as if it was carefully distinguishing or investigating something. In the middle, it looked up at Lu Chen several times, as if it was a little puzzled. However, after a while, Atsu seemed to have made some progress. It looked a little excited, and its movements became a little faster. It slowly began to walk forward on the ground, and at the same time, it was still sniffing the ground. Lu Chen was overjoyed, and he followed behind Atsu, saying, "Well, it smells good, we must find it." At this moment, his face suddenly changed slightly, and he turned to look at the door. Outside the door was still an empty passageway. There was not a single person in sight. Lu Chen frowned, walked over, and poked his head out to look at the passage outside. It was straight and long, and it was quiet. However, from a faraway place, in the midst of the silence, there seemed to be a very faint voice suddenly coming over. Pa, the sound was small and light, but it slowly became louder and clearer. It seemed that a group of people was running here quickly. Lu Chen's face turned cold, and in his eyes, black flames flashed. Chapter 457. Lu Chen's face was gloomy, a murderous look surfaced on his face. Needless to say, the pursuers outside were most likely the evil faction's troops, and right now there was no way to escape. It looked like a hopeless situation. The evil faction had a blood feud with him, it was impossible to reconcile. If they found him here, most likely it would be a bloody battle to the death. Lu Chen was well aware of this. He also knew the craziness of the evil faction's followers, but after many years of experience, countless adventures and tribulations on the edge of life and death, it had long made his will as hard as steel. Even if he were to die here today, he was not afraid of anything. In fact, compared to death, Lu Chen was more unwilling to fall into the hands of the evil faction. In the past years, he had deeply witnessed the darkest scenes of this crazy sect. Even he himself had once become a part of this darkness. He thought quietly in his heart, and then a black dagger quietly appeared in his hand. Life or death, it all depended on himself. He looked back and found that Atsu had already walked to the stone pillar in the center and was sniffing carefully, but for the time being, it seemed that there was still nothing. Lu Chen's heart suddenly moved. He thought of a strange thing. It was those two people who walked out from here. Then there must be a mechanism here that could open a secret door somewhere, but right now they could not find it. There were only two possibilities. 1. The mechanism here was too well hidden in a top-secret place, even Atsu could not find it. 2. The evil faction sorcerers had secretly opened the door here from the beginning, and after the changes happened outside, they directly entered here and closed the secret door. Which one it was not important. The important thing was, there must be an exit here. Lu Chen looked around, his eyes flashed, and then he saw Atsu's footsteps were getting faster and faster, but he kept circling around that pillar. With every circle, Atsu would growl in a low voice, looking more and more perplexed, but he still could not find that damn mechanism's entrance. Outside the door, the footsteps were getting closer and closer, as if they had reached the last straight passage leading here. Lu Chen's eyes flashed. Suddenly he strode over, grabbed Atsu and then leaned it behind him, whispered urgently, "Go up, step on my shoulder and smell." Atsu was stunned for a moment. Before it could react, Lu Chen had already squatted down, grabbed Atsu's feet and put it on his shoulder. Atsu immediately understood. It was a little hesitant at first, but then it also leaned on him. Lu Chen let out a muffled groan. He straightened his body and pushed Atsu's body up. At the same time, his expression changed slightly. He snorted coldly and cursed, "Damn it. You stupid dog, you can't eat so much in the future, it's so heavy." Atsu let out a low growl with some dissatisfaction. It looked a little annoyed, but with Lu Chen's help, it quickly approached the roof. Atsu stood up like a human, stretched out its nose and started sniffing. Not long after, Atsu's body suddenly stopped, as if it had discovered something. It barked a few times and then looked very excited. It stretched out its two front paws and desperately slapped a piece of green brick beside the stone pillar. Lu Chen was overjoyed. Just as he was about to take action, suddenly he heard a crisp sound from above, followed by a thin piece of stone falling down, landing on the ground with a bang. At the top of the roof, a small square hole was revealed. Inside was a red handle. It was also at this moment, suddenly, the sound outside the door disappeared. Lu Chen's face suddenly darkened. He looked back, only to see a figure flashed past the door. A moment later, a figure stood at the door of this circular room. It was Chen He. And behind him, there were many figures, following one after another. The atmosphere in this room instantly became dead silent, stiff and cold. On the long street of Immortal City's White Tiger district, above and below the big pit, inside and outside, there was silence. Everyone in Fuyunji heard that sentence. That was what true Lord Tianlan said to Shuang, calm, indifferent, and unperturbed, as if it was a very casual instruction. But Shuang did not believe it, and neither did the surrounding people. However, under the pressure of the true Lord, no one dared to breathe loudly. Shui Ying's body even trembled slightly, but in the end, she still forced herself to calm down. Then a trace of sadness appeared on her face, and she slowly walked up. That tall and burly true Lord Tianlan looked down at her from above, looking like a god, like a mountain, as if he always stood high up in the clouds, as if he could easily crush mortals in the mortal world. Shuang felt that her hands and feet weren't listening to her, but her many years of experience in managing the floating clouds agency allowed her to forcibly hold on. It was probably for the sake of her face, which she didn't really care about. She slowly walked to true Lord Tianlan's side, called out in a low voice, and then thought faintly in her heart, if a person is dead, what use his face? True Lord Tianlan did not have the intention to reason with her, nor did he have the leisure time to chat with her, and instead asked straightforwardly, do you have any ideas now? Shuang took a deep breath, her hands tightly clenched into fists in her sleeves, and said in a low voice, there must be something strange about the ruins below the pit. If you are willing to give me a little more time, I will definitely be able to find it. True Lord Tianlan sneered, and said, how long do you need? Shuang was speechless. She had followed true monarch Tianlan for many years and was well aware of this lord's terrifying and unfathomable personality. A long, long time ago, she had already repeatedly warned herself not to lie to this lord true monarch. Therefore, after hesitating for a moment, Shuang finally chose to tell the truth, and said bitterly, I don't know. A green aura flashed across true Lord Tianlan's face, and his gaze swept across the surrounding long street, the mess in the pit, the charred corpses, the heavily injured people lying on the ground, and said in a low voice, it's been more than 10 years, this is the worst defeat we've suffered in the hands of the devil's sect in more than 10 years. Shuang lowered her head, unable to speak, and her body trembled slightly. True Lord Tianlan looked at her, and an enormous aura swept over like a raging wave. Just as this invisible aura was about to drown this charming woman, suddenly, in this silence, everyone suddenly heard a strange rumbling sound coming from the depths of the ground. A moment later, everyone at the bottom of the pit suddenly cried out, and then retreated one after another. However, the ruins in the corner of the ruins shook, and then all kinds of runes flashed in succession, sliding away, and in the blink of an eye, a 3-foot square black hole appeared. Everyone was in an uproar, but before they could react, they heard a series of bone-chilling explosions from inside, and a thick black flame first rushed out of the hole, and then a thick cloud of black smoke. A moment later, everyone heard a shrill cry from inside the black hole, and a black shadow rushed out of the black hole, but then its body tilted in mid-air, and it fell from the sky like a kite with a broken string. Someone in the distance cried out in alarm, but in the blink of an eye, true Lord Tianlan's figure appeared in mid-air, and with one arm, he caught the person who fell from the sky. It was Lu Chen. At this moment, Half of his body seemed to have been burned by the raging flames, and he looked terrible, badly mutilated, but for some reason, he still seemed to be conscious, and with some difficulty, he turned his head to look at True Lord Tianlan. True Lord Tianlan also looked at him quietly, but in the depths of that pair of eyes that were as deep as the deep sea, there seemed to be raging waves. Lu Chen looked at him, the corner of his mouth twitched, and then he actually seemed to smile. After a moment, in that silence, everyone present heard that sentence, "Sigh, damn Baldy." Before the voice died away, Lu Chen's head tilted, and he had already fainted. Chapter 458. A roar came from beneath their feet. It came from the cave again, giving everyone a fright. They turned to look and saw a tall black dog jumping out of the cave amidst the billowing black smoke. It was Atsu, of course. He looked rather disheveled. His fur had been burnt in many places, especially his buttocks, where a small patch had been burnt off. It looked rather comical. But other than that, Atsu did not seem to have suffered much damage and was in good spirits. After jumping out, he shook off the dust on his body and looked up at the sky. Then, he called out to perfected Lord Tianlan and Lu Chen who had fainted in midair. Woof, woof woof woof. At this moment, there was only the sound of this dog on the long street. It sounded rather strange. However, very soon, Supreme Lord Tianlan landed and casually waved his hand. Someone ran over and took over Lu Chen from his hands. At this time, Xueying also came to the side. Her bright eyes glanced at Lu Chen's face, and her expression changed slightly. She looked at True Lord Tianlan and was about to speak, but True Lord Tianlan already said coldly, "Take care of him." Xueying was taken aback. Before she could reply, she saw Supreme Lord Tianlan push Lu Chen's body towards her. Then, with a wave of his sleeve, his figure fell into the hole that was still emitting black smoke. Before his figure arrived, all the black smoke seemed to be suppressed by an invisible force. It dispersed in all directions and made a path. Under everyone's gaze, the burly figure directly entered the cave that had suddenly appeared. Xueying hurriedly called the people beside her and instructed them as quickly as possible, "Bring him up. Find a safe place on the street to treat his injuries. Send people to guard him. We must not let anything happen." After saying that, she turned around and immediately picked 10 people. They were all elites with extremely high cultivation and strength in Fuyunji. Then, without hesitation, she rushed into the cave first. The others glanced at each other when they saw this, and then they followed in succession. As soon as Supreme Lord Tianlan's body landed, he felt a wave of hot air rushing towards him. A few balls of burning flames swept towards him with a whoosh. True Lord Tianlan's face was calm and tranquil, without the slightest astonishment. He didn't even make a move to dodge. Instead, he casually waved his right hand, and an invisible airwave immediately surged out of his sleeve, pushing all the surrounding black flames back about 10 feet away. This was an underground circular stone room surrounded by large chunks of hard rocks. A stone pillar stood in the middle, which was now mostly damaged. The black hole that had fallen from above was actually within this stone pillar. At this moment, there were no flammable objects in the stone room, but the flames were still burning fiercely as if they had appeared out of thin air. It was rather strange. Supreme Lord Tianlan's face was gloomy. He looked left and right and soon discovered some intact or cracked black iron balls on the ground. Extremely high temperature and remnant flames were still being emitted from within. It seemed like the raging fire in the room was caused by these black iron balls. At the same time, on the other side of the stone room, a commotion was heard. After a while, many figures appeared. It was Chen He and the rest. Looking from here, there were many figures on the spacious passageway outside, at least more than 15 to 16 people. It was a lot more than the number of people that Chen He brought here at the beginning. Thinking about it, perhaps after the fierce battle here, the evil faction demons who were still searching in the distant underground city had also rushed over one by one. Supreme Lord Tianlan's eyes lowered slightly. He saw a group of people led by Chen He were holding many similar black iron balls in their hands. Their expressions were ferocious and looked murderous. He stared at these people for a moment and suddenly sneered and said, "Is this another vicious thing made by that old turtle?" The evil sect people's countenance changed. A few of them had already loudly cursed. The old turtle was not talking about someone else. It was the only remaining evil sect elder ghost. Because the evil sect was weak, Zhengxiameng and Fuyunji were ruthless, therefore Ghost Elder Ghost had been hiding for a long time. The good faction people had never been able to find him. In addition, the word ghost was similar to turtle. Therefore the term old turtle was sometimes used by the good faction people to despise and slander Ghost Elder Ghost. Supreme Lord Tianlan paid no attention to those evil sect demons' curses. He looked at them coldly, flicked his sleeves and walked forward. He walked carelessly and confidently. He walked condescendingly and insufferably arrogant. It was as if the 10 or 20 extremely vicious evil sect experts were nothing to him. Standing in front, Chen He's countenance changed slightly. He stared at Supreme Lord Tianlan and seemed to have thought of something. But the few evil sect people beside him could not bear it. After cursing loudly, they directly threw the black iron balls in their hands toward Supreme Lord Tianlan. The black balls opened in midair with a bang. Immediately a fire seemed to light up from inside. Following which, a dazzling fire exploded like fireworks. In a flash, a ball of extremely hot flame appeared and pounced toward Supreme Lord Tianlan. Top, bottom, left, middle and right. A total of 5 fireballs flew over like they were chasing after lives and souls. They were going to burn that damn fatty to death. However, this damned fatty and damned baldy didn't seem to care about these terrifying things that were flying towards him at all. He waved his sleeve in the air and didn't even stop his footsteps. The 5 fireballs actually flew back directly. The blazing flame made a sharp roar in the air, the speed actually increased by several times in an instant, only a boom sound was heard, the fireball directly crashed into the evil faction crowd. Immediately it was a scene of chaos. Some people were burned by the fire and jumped in pain. There were even 2 or 3 people who were directly engulfed by the flames. They screamed and rolled on the ground. Chen He suddenly bellowed, turned and ran. He shouted, "Quickly go! This is Tianlan, that old thief." Before he finished his words, he had already swept away in the passageway. Looking at that speed, he had already used all of his strength. Just to get a little further away from this seemingly tall and big damn baldy. The evil sect disciples, who were originally incomparably furious and about to charge up and risk their lives, suddenly froze in an instant. Everyone's eyes landed on Tianlan, and then a moment later, suddenly everyone shouted at the same time and ran away together, not even caring about the injured who were still rolling around in pain on the ground. Supreme Lord Tianlan coldly snorted. Looking at those evil sect people who were running away in a sorry state, his eyes revealed some disdain and walked over in big strides. At the same time, so sound was heard behind him. It was Shuang and the people from Fuyunji jumping down. Landing on the ground, Shuang saw the surrounding scene clearly. At this moment, how could she not know what had happened here? Especially those people who were running away. The people from Fuyunji recognized it at a glance. Immediately, everyone's face revealed an overjoyed expression. So this is the old nest of the evil sect in the Immortal City. Shuang looked at Supreme Lord Tianlan with a questioning gaze. Supreme Lord Tianlan nodded. Shuang immediately turned back to call everyone and chased forward with the fastest speed. "Chase, we must catch that old turtle." A clear and excited voice reverberated underground. Everyone broke free from their previous dejection and ran away with joy and excitement. Only Supreme Lord Tianlan was left standing in the house. He raised his head and looked at the black hole above. His expression suddenly became a little strange and complicated. After a moment, he softly muttered to himself and said, "Could it be, this is fate?" Chapter 459. The evil cult followers fled like stray dogs, even though the number of Fuyunji, Shuang and the others who were chasing them was much smaller than them, but no one dared to turn back, and no one thought of turning back to fight with these Fuyunji enemies to stop their pursuers. Because behind these pursuers, that tall and sturdy figure was like an insurmountable mountain, his shadow blotting out the sky and covering the earth, directly crushing all the evil cult followers' mental defenses. For so many years, true Lord Tianlan's lofty and highly respected position in the hearts of the world's good faction cultivators, if it was the evil cult followers, he would be as terrifying as a soul reaper. But fortunately, not all of the evil cult followers were scared out of their wits, even though they knew that although their group seemed to have the advantage in numbers, but in front of such a powerful demigod true Lord Chen, he still paid attention to the situation behind him as he fled. Very quickly, he discovered that the ones chasing the most closely were Shuang and less than 10 of her subordinates, and that true Lord Tianlan did not catch up. Chen he did not know why, but of course he would not believe that true Lord Tianlan's strength was not enough, or that he was benevolent. Most likely it was that big shot who valued his status. In the evil cult, other than the mysterious ghost elder, there was probably no one else who was worthy of him taking action. This might be an opportunity. Chen He's eyes lit up, his mind frantically thinking. As he ran, he suddenly whispered a few words to the people beside him. Shuang was chasing after them with a face full of excitement. Seeing that they were getting closer and closer, she suddenly saw 4 or 5 devil cult demons in front of her suddenly turned around, raised their hands, and threw a few black iron balls at them. Then, they ran away with all their might. Shuang had led Fuyunji to fight against the evil cult for many years. Naturally she was incomparably experienced, although right now she was relying on true Lord Tianlan's divine might to gain the upper hand, but along the way she actually still kept an eye out. At this moment, suddenly seeing this scene, she quickly recalled in her mind but realized that she had never seen this kind of black iron ball in the past battles with the evil faction. After a shock, her first reaction was to stop and then shouted, "Be careful." However, the other Fuyunji people beside him were extremely anxious. Firstly, there was the high and mighty Supreme Tianlan watching from behind. Secondly, the devil cult demons in front of them only looked like they were fleeing in panic. A few of them had already rushed over when Shuang opened her mouth to warn them. By the time they reacted and wanted to stop, those extremely fast black iron balls had already flown in front of them. Boom! A ball of raging flames suddenly appeared, instantly burning and wrapping around a man who was charging at the forefront. In the blink of an eye, the flame wrapped around him, turning him into a flaming man. A mournful scream immediately rang out. Shuang and the others were all greatly shocked, subconsciously stopping in their tracks. However, the many years of experience fighting against the evil cult still came into play at this moment. Once they saw such a strange change, almost everyone immediately reacted. Shuang gave a light shout with a calm face. Instead of retreating, she leapt into the air with a strangely shaped silk net in her hand. The silk net was completely blood red. Before it was unfurled, it was impossible to see where Shuang had hidden it. Now that it was unfurled, it instantly expanded like a magic weapon, instantly sealing off the entire passage. A strange red flying aureole appeared on this red net. She suddenly raised her head and actually let out a clear and loud cry. And behind her, the rest of the Fuyunji people rushed towards their comrade who was engulfed in flames. They frantically beat out the flames on his body and at the same time took out healing pills to treat his injuries. It seemed like they completely did not care about the remaining few equally dangerous iron balls. Or perhaps they had complete confidence in their beautiful and charming leader Shuang. In midair, Shuaying's expression was solemn and dignified. She appeared to be very cautious. After a while, the remaining black iron balls all smashed into the red net. Shui Ying's arm shook, and the flying warblers on the red net actually flew up with a cry, directly wrapping around all the black balls. Immediately after, all the other nets on the red net rolled back, wrapping tightly layer by layer, as if they were wrapping a dumpling. Boom, this time, it was an unusually deep and frightening echo. That piece of red silk net continuously jumped a few times in the air, the red light flourished but very quickly, it quieted down and then slowly floated down. As for those terrifying raging flames, they did not appear again. There was a commotion among the devil cult people in front, their speed of escape increased. Shuang stretched out her hand and kept the silk net. She lowered her head and looked at her comrade who had been burnt black and blue for a short period of time. She made a prompt decision to first let one person take care of him. Once his condition and injuries had stabilized, he would be sent back to the ground. Another person immediately went back to the ground. This was to mobilize all the manpower in Fuyunji. Now that the people on the ground outside were to immediately come down, she then sent out an order for more experts from Fuyunji in the Immortal City to come here at full speed. She made this series of arrangements quickly but methodically. Everyone obeyed her orders and then they continued to chase. It was also at this time, True Lord Tianlan calmly walked over from behind. When he passed by her, he glanced at Shuang. Shuang lowered her head slightly, her face was slightly pale and guilty. True Lord Tianlan suddenly said, his voice was not loud but it was enough for everyone in this passage to hear, "You did very well." After speaking, he waved his wide sleeves, with one stride, as if he had already crossed an unbelievable distance of 2 to 3 zhangs, he continued to walk forward. And behind him, Shuang suddenly raised her head, her pearly white teeth bit her red lips. After a moment, she suddenly waved her hand, her face once again turned back to her usual grave and stern expression, her eyes like lightning and frost, she shouted, "Chase, the devil cult people, if there is any resistance, kill without mercy." The long passage under the feet of these cultivators with high cultivation, especially after they sprinted and flew with all their might, it seemed to have become much shorter. Not long after, Chen He and the rest of the devil cult people rushed out of that passage and once again returned to that huge underground cave. Looking at that underground city that was shrouded by the strange blood-colored moonlight, looking at the huge underground space, Chen He shouted, "Scatter and run." He had just finished his words when all of the devil cult people, like monkeys after a fallen tree, fled in all directions. At the same time, Chen He also shouted to some of the remaining devil cult people who did not know what was happening, telling them to quickly escape. And at this moment, a figure flashed in that passage. True Lord Tianlan's tall and sturdy body walked out. He casually glanced at those devil cult people who were running in all directions, suddenly sneered, suddenly stretched out a fist and directly hit the hard stone wall beside him. With a loud bang, the stone wall trembled and cracked. The piece where his fist had struck was even more fragmented, and more than a dozen fragments of various sizes flew out. True Lord Tianlan did not even look at it, his palm like floating clouds and flowing water directly brushed past. All the stones gathered with a loud rumble and gathered in his palm. Then, he flung them outwards. In an instant, a sharp whistling sound pierced through the air, like thunder descending on the world. Like arrows released from a bow, these large and small stones rushed towards the demons of the evil sect who were running. Ah 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 ah. Miserable cries instantly sounded. At the same time, some of the devil cult people as if they were hit by a heavy blow, some directly fell to the ground, some fell to the side and some unlucky ones were hit by the large stones, directly flew out and then heavily smashed into those tall buildings' walls. A sound, after spitting out a mouthful of blood, slowly slid down and fell to the ground twitching, unable to stand up. For a time, ghostly wails and howls could be heard from the city below, but True Lord Tianlan didn't seem to care. He merely smiled disdainfully and narrowed his eyes. Then, he looked up at the strange light in the sky. The blood-colored moonlight, spilled down, shone into his eyes, indistinctly seemed to reflect his eyes into a patch of red. Chapter 460. Lu Chen saw a red door floating in the boundless night sky. The sky was decorated with stars, shining brightly. He felt that the red door of light looked familiar, as if he had seen it somewhere before. After a while, he suddenly thought of the tree hole in the mysterious seed and the two doors that appeared in the depths of the tree wall. It seemed a little similar, but after looking at it carefully for a long time, he felt that something was wrong. Lu Chen felt that his mind was a little nervous and slow, as if he could vaguely see the truth but could not grasp it. Then, he suddenly saw the red door of light in the night sky shining with extraordinary splendor, radiating a blood-red light. In the dazzling light, the door opened. In an instant, the red light illuminated the world, and a blood-red moon rose from the door, rising directly to the center of the night sky, shining brightly. Therefore, every inch and every place between heaven and earth was covered with red, looking like a sea of blood. Phew! Lu Chen let out a muffled groan, feeling a splitting headache, and suddenly woke up from the nightmare. When he opened his eyes, he saw a white wall and a familiar bed. Cold sweat seeped out of his forehead, and his breathing was rapid. But at this moment, suddenly, a broad and gentle big hand stretched out from behind him, and gently patted his shoulder. Then, he heard that familiar deep voice behind him, saying, "Are you dreaming?" Lu Chen composed himself, then turned around and saw perfected Lord Tianlan sitting on the edge of his bed, looking at him with some concern. His hand was still on his shoulder, and it was as warm as a mountain. For some reason, Lu Chen inexplicably felt a prickling pain on his back, as if a knife was stabbing into his back. He looked at perfected Lord Tianlan, took a deep breath, as if he had calmed down from the nightmare, and then regained his composure, saying, "Where am I? What happened?" "You were in the house at Horse Washing Bridge. Because you were injured in the battle with the demons of the devil cult, you were unconscious for a day and just woke up." Perfected Lord Tianlan explained the situation to him briefly and straightforwardly. Then, he asked, "How do you feel now?" Lu Chen hesitated for a moment, then felt pain coming from some parts of his body, but it was almost nothing to him. Other than that, there didn't seem to be any other serious internal injuries, so he nodded and said, "It's okay, I should be fine. Logically speaking, my injury shouldn't have healed so quickly." "Could it be that you?" Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded. "I helped out a little." Lu Chen was silent for a moment before looking up at perfected Lord Tianlan. "You're a perfected lord of the Immortal Alliance whose name is known throughout the world and is highly respected. No matter what, you shouldn't be taking action for a nobody. Aren't you announcing to the world that there's an unknown relationship between us by doing this?" Perfected Lord Tianlan shrugged, looking as if he didn't care at all. "More or less." But Lu Chen didn't want him to muddle through like this. He frowned and said, "Don't fool around. This matter is very troublesome. After what you've done, Zhengxianmeng and the devil cult will probably know that I have a close relationship with you. How can I help you with those secret matters in the future? No." Perfected Lord Tianlan said, "You don't have to do those things in the future." Lu Chen was startled and said with some surprise, "What?" Perfected Lord Tianlan stood up and walked 2 steps in the house with his hands behind his back. He said lightly, "You should recuperate first. After 2 days, when you're better, I'll find a chance to hold a ceremony and officially announce to the world that I've accepted you as my disciple." Even if Lu Chen had long since tempered his calm disposition to remain unfazed even if Mount Tai were to collapse before him, he was astounded at this moment, and he was shocked to the point of being unable to speak for a long time. After a short while, he said with slight disbelief, What's wrong with you? Why are you suddenly doing this?" Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled and said, "Because you've worked hard and made great contributions. More than 10 years ago, you sneaked into the devil cult when you were still a teenager. You were accompanied by danger day and night and only a thin line between life and death. After that, you've made great contributions time and time again. Especially in the Battle of the Desolate Valley, you reversed the situation and defeated the Devil Cult's 100-year plan, benefiting the people in the world. I've never been able to repay you for such contributions. Now, it can be considered. I don't believe you. Lu Chen shook his head and said. Perfected Lord Tianlan was obviously stunned. Then, he sighed and said, all right, I've raised you since you were young. No matter what happens in the future, I've only treated you like this all these years. Don't tell me that you still doubt my sincerity in raising you. After a moment of silence, Lu Chen said slowly, you've raised me. Naturally, I trust and respect you. I've even risked my life for you. But to be honest, given your identity and status, He paused for a moment and said in a low voice, anyway, you didn't accept me as your disciple 10 years ago. I can't understand why you're doing this all of a sudden. Perfected Lord Tianlan turned around and stared at Lu Chen with a pair of eyes that were as deep as the sea. The light in his eyes was like surging waves that could drown a person at any time. Lu Chen also calmed down and looked at him calmly. However, no one knew that under the blanket, his palms were secretly clenched into fists and his palms were covered in cold sweat. The room was silent. After an unknown period of time, Perfected Lord Tianlan finally looked away and walked to the window. With his back facing Lu Chen, he looked out of the window and gazed at the sky in the distance. Lu Chen heaved a sigh of relief. It felt like he was being stared at by an incomparably ferocious beast. It was hair-raising. After a while, he suddenly heard Perfected Lord Tianlan, who was standing in front of the window, say something that confused him. Do you know what luck means? Luck? Lu Chen was stunned. He then shook his head and said, I don't know. Does it mean luck? Perfected Lord Tianlan turned around and glanced at him. Lu Chen immediately waved his hand and said, pretend I didn't say anything. Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at him for a moment and suddenly sighed. Over the past few decades, you're the only one who dared to talk to me like that. Yet, I've always tolerated you. Now that I think about it, it's probably what Master meant when he said luck. Master? Lu Chen hesitated. A sliver of sternness appeared on his face as he said, perhaps it's your master, the Tianhong ancestor? Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded silently. After a moment of silence, he said, my master has only taken in 2 disciples in his life. One is me, and the other is my senior brother, Bai Chen. Senior brother Bai Chen joined the sect decades before me. Be it his realm, Dermic Dao, reputation, or ability, he was above me in all aspects. Everyone in the world, including the Kunlun party, thought that he would definitely inherit Master's mantle and inherit the Tian Dao title. But in the end, Master passed it on to me. Do you know why? For some reason, Lu Chen suddenly felt nervous. In order to ease his nervousness, he forced a smile and said, I don't know. Perfected Lord Tianlan suddenly burst into laughter. He looked like he was smiling. After a sigh, he said, actually, I don't know either. It's just that before Master died, when I hugged his body and was at a loss of what to do, the last thing he said to me was, you have the luck to inherit the Dao title. After a pause, Perfected Lord Tianlan seemed to be in a daze as if he was recalling the past. He then said leisurely, I remember that senior brother Bai Chen almost went mad from anger. Chapter 461. To be honest, I didn't know what providence was back then. Why did Master value it so much? I only remember that when Master passed away, he looked at me with a faint smile. His smile was a little strange. Perfected Lord Tianlan sighed and said to Lu Chen, therefore, there was a period of time when I even suspected that there might not be providence at all. Could it be that Master didn't like senior brother Bai Chen and deliberately said that? Even I was a little confused. Senior brother Bai Chen naturally flew into a rage. He obviously didn't believe in this baffling providence, but he couldn't change Master's will. Therefore, he probably hated me from then on. However, it's no wonder. If it were me in his position, I would probably go crazy from anger too. Perfected Lord Tianlan spoke of this secret in a very relaxed manner. It even sounded a little funny and humorous. However, whenever Lu Chen thought of the situation back then, especially when the two of them became world-shaking soul formation perfected lords in the future, he felt his scalp tingle. Then, he quickly thought of the huge change in the Kunlun party a few years ago. On the night of the full moon, only one of the two soul formation perfected lords survived in the end. Nowadays, almost no one would talk about the deceased Hakushin Jinkuan anymore. After all, the faction he left behind had been wiped out. Even among the three most direct disciples, one was in seclusion and had never seen the light of day, the other defected to the enemy, and the youngest one was left. Now, it seemed like he had become a memorial archway to promote others' good deeds. That's why I still don't understand after all this talk. Can you tell me what providence is? Lu Chen asked him. Perfected Lord Tianlan thought for a moment and said to him, it's probably, good luck? Lu Chen, Perfected Lord Tianlan laughed. He seemed to be laughing very happily. Usually, he wouldn't laugh like this. Even if he did, he would laugh in a dignified manner. His laughter would make people admire him, his laughter would shake the world, and his laughter would make everyone tremble in fear. It was only at this moment, when he was alone with Lu Chen, that he suddenly laughed to his heart's content. He clapped his hands and said, who cares? In any case, before my master died, he was also acting mysteriously like, I'll know when the time comes. I think it's fine as long as it works. He looked at Lu Chen and said with a smile, over the years, you have helped me do many things, especially when it came to defeating the devil cult. You did what others could not. This is fate. Over the years, you have been on the verge of death many times. Others have died, but you have survived. I think this is also fate. Let's talk about the day before yesterday. When the Floating Clouds Company suffered a huge setback and everyone was panicking, you appeared and found the devil cult's lair. This is naturally fate. Lu Chen was silent for a while and then said, I remember that you didn't seem to believe in providence before. Yes, I didn't believe in providence before. That's all I have now. Perfected Lord Tianlan did not seem to mind as he said indifferently, however, when I went down to the catacombs and saw that blood moon, I felt that you're truly different from the rest. This luck can only belong to you. Blood moon? Lu Chen was shocked. He thought for a moment and said, the one on the underground city? Yes. A gentle breeze blew. After the door opened, Perfected Lord Tianlan's huge body walked out. After closing the door, he walked into the courtyard and bathed in the cool breeze. He looked up at the sky. The blue sky and white clouds were like crystal-clear gems. He quietly gazed into the distance, and after a while, he walked towards the main gate. However, just as he was about to leave the courtyard, he suddenly turned around to look at the room Lu Chen was in, and a complicated expression gradually appeared on his face. He seemed to be a little happy and gratified, but also a little puzzled. He looked deeply at the door, his eyes as deep as the sea reflecting some light and shadow. After a while, he sighed softly, shook his head slightly and said something to himself in a low voice. His words were a little vague. Except for himself, no one could hear what he said. After a while, this world-famous perfected lord of the divine transformation realm left. His figure was elegant and his sleeves fluttered. Not long after, he once again came to the long street where something big had happened not long ago. The crater that had been created by the explosion had already been tightly surrounded by the Floating Clouds division. Not to mention passing through here, they had even sealed off the entire street. This was the Immortal City, the headquarters of Zhengxianmeng. Fuyunji was backed by a huge mountain and had great influence. They could do whatever they wanted. No one dared to block perfected Lord Tianlan's way. Not long after, he arrived at the side of the huge pit. Shuang was not here today. When the people around saw perfected Lord Tianlan, they all showed respectful expressions and greeted him. Perfected Lord Tianlan waved his hand and went down the dark passageway into the underground world. Compared to the busy, crowded, and austere atmosphere on the surface, this underground cave, especially the strange city, seemed much quieter. Of course, there were also many people here. They were all people from Fuyunji or other halls in Zhengxianmeng. Every entrance and exit of the tunnel and every suspicious tunnel was guarded. Many people in the huge city were also searching from house to house, trying their best not to miss any clues. Perfected Lord Tianlan's gaze swept across the busy but orderly scene. Finally, his gaze landed on the strange statue in the center of the city. An old man was sitting cross-legged on the ground, looking up at the blood moon in the sky. He seemed to be in a daze and did not move for a long time. Perfected Lord Tianlan walked over and sat down next to the Master of Starry Hall, one of the 6 perfected lords of the true Immortal Alliance who was as famous as him. After a while, he asked, "How is it? Did you see anything?" Perfected Lord Guyu did not answer his question immediately. Instead, he continued to stare at the blood moon. After a while, he sighed and said, "I can't believe that our few generations have been wrong. All along, I thought that the blood moon would definitely rise into the night sky outside. Who would have thought that it would appear under our feet without a sound?" Perfected Lord Tianlan shrugged and did not speak. Perfected Lord Guyu looked at him and said, "The person who discovered this place has made a great contribution. This is truly a great contribution. We must reward him well." Perfected Lord Tianlan chuckled and said, "Don't worry, I have my reasons. Now that the blood moon has appeared, how are you going to deal with it?" Perfected Lord Guyu pondered for a while and said, "The true body of the seal is deep underground. It should be fine for the time being. However, this level has been tormented by the trash of the evil cult. They even inexplicably added a lot of mechanisms. Therefore, the restrictions here are basically useless. They really can't do anything right but are more than good at spoiling things." As he spoke, his face revealed an angry expression. Perfected Lord Tianlan was not that angry. He smiled and said, "Let it go and deal with it properly." Perfected Lord Guyu was a little surprised. He took another look at him and said, "What's wrong with you today? Why are you in such a good mood?" Perfected Lord Tianlan thought for a while and said, "I plan to organize a disciple acceptance ceremony. You should come over too. I'll call a few other old fellows." Perfected Lord Guyu's expression changed and revealed a rare look of surprise. He said, "You? Who's so lucky? He's ascending to the heavens in one step." Chapter 462. A strange change occurred in the battle on the Long Street. The Fuyun division was about to suffer a humiliating and crushing defeat that had not been seen for many years. In the center of the cultivation world, in the celestial city, under the attention of countless people, they were slapped in the face by the devil cult. They were utterly humiliated. However, things took a turn for the better in the end. Under the leadership of the wise Zhengxianmeng and several deity transformation stage deities, the strong and tenacious Fuyunji remained calm in the face of danger. The more they suffered, the braver they became. They found a chance of survival in the desperate situation. With the help of a powerful shadow that had infiltrated the devil cult, they broke the devil cult's trap and killed their way into the devil's cave. Finally, they destroyed the devil cult's lair that had been operating in the immortal city for decades. They killed and captured more than 100 devil cult demons. Although the only flaw was that the devil cult's chief ghost elder still managed to escape, this battle had already dealt a heavy blow to the devil cult's vitality and greatly boosted the morale of the righteous path of the world. It also proved once again that the Fuyun division was indeed an iron army personally created by Lord Tianlan. They were the guardians of justice, and they were the masters of steel that always upheld justice and justice. Isn't this boasting a bit too much? Lu Chen held the notice in his hand and looked at Old Ma with a helpless expression. At this time, in Lu Chen's room, Old Ma and White Lotus were all there. The black dog that was injured in the battle on the long street was also there. However, this time it was not lying on the ground. It was probably because it had contributed greatly to Lu Chen in the previous battle and was gloriously injured, so its status was greatly increased. Now it was lying on the soft bed proudly, taking up most of the space. However, Lu Chen did not suffer any loss. He sat on the edge of the bed and directly leaned on the hill-like black dog, looking very comfortable. Old Ma coughed and took the notice. He smiled and said, "I think it's okay. It's not much different from the truth." White Lotus, who was next to him, interrupted, "You yourself said that you were bragging. Isn't it better to say that you were bragging? Otherwise, you might as well say that you were beaten up by the devil cult." Lu Chen rolled his eyes at the sharp-tongued girl, then asked Old Ma, what was the final result of the battle? Was it really as the notice said? Old Ma shook his head and said, "No." Lu Chen's face revealed an, as expected, expression. The corners of his mouth twitched as he asked, "How many are there?" Old Ma thought about it and said, "I killed more than a dozen of them and captured less than 10 alive." What? This time, it was White Lotus who was taken aback. She said in astonishment, "It's so different from what the notice said." Lu Chen laughed and said to White Lotus, "Weren't you looking down on me just now? Why can't you hold it in now?" White Lotus snorted and looked a little annoyed. "I originally thought that it's okay to brag in Fuyunji. After all, we defeated the devil cult. But the number of people killed went from 12 or 20 to over 100. It's a little too exaggerated." It had to be said that even when a beautiful girl was angry, she still had a unique charm. Not to mention that White Lotus had a beautiful and outstanding appearance. Lu Chen and Old Ma couldn't help but take another look at the beautiful girl, who was pouting slightly but vaguely captivating. Old Ma said with a smile, "That's why I said that you two are still too young. Look at me looking at this thing, your faces are calm and your mood is very calm." Lu Chen spat and said, "It's fine if you're talking about White Lotus, but how old am I? How can I be a young person? Forget it. Anyway, no matter how exaggerated this matter is, it has nothing to do with me." Old Ma was about to speak when White Lotus interrupted and said angrily, "What do you mean forget it? You two old men are so great because you're old? Let me tell you, I've already grown up. Knowledge, experience and cultivation are all up to you. If I'm worse than you in any aspect, it's my loss." After saying that, she even straightened her body and puffed out her chest with a solemn expression. This time, Lu Chen and Old Ma didn't dare to look at her anymore. Very quickly, they moved their gazes away from this already grown-up girl. They looked at each other and both looked a little embarrassed. Old Ma coughed dryly and said, "It can't be said that it has nothing to do with you. After all, it was you who made a great contribution at the critical moment and saved Fuyunji's face." Lu Chen shook his head and said, "It's not easy to say that. After all, it was so many brothers in Fuyunji who fought to the death that they could defeat the evil faction." At this moment, White Lotus interrupted again and said, "If you ask me, they really didn't take you seriously. They just casually set a shadow and brought you over. At that time, if you hadn't found the underground lair of the evil faction, I don't know how Fuyunji would have ended up." Lu Chen looked at White Lotus strangely and said with slight surprise, "What's wrong with you today? Why are you always speaking up for me?" Old Ma smiled and said, "How can you say that? That day when the tunnel collapsed, you didn't run out. White Lotus was very worried outside and has been anxiously looking for someone to save you." White Lotus's cheeks turned slightly red and then she snorted and said, "Nonsense. I'm not anxious because of him." As she said that, she walked over and sat beside Lu Chen. She reached out and patted Atsu's head and glared at the black dog and said, "I'm anxious because of Atsu. This dog still owes me something, I can't let it die like this. Am I right, Atsu?" Atsu, whose butt was burned, raised its head and looked at White Lotus. It wagged its tail and barked. White Lotus smiled and nodded slightly. She looked at Atsu as if saying, "At least you know what's good for you." Lu Chen also smiled and ignored them. He turned to Old Ma and said, "Well, let's not talk about these useless things. I have something to tell you." Before he finished speaking, they suddenly heard a few steady and crisp knocks on the door, which immediately interrupted their conversation. The expressions of the three people in the room changed slightly. After a while, Old Ma nodded to them and walked over to open the door. They saw a woman standing outside the door. She was charming and beautiful, which made people's eyes light up. It was the leader of Fuyunji, Shuang. Her position in Fuyunji, and even in the whole of Zhengxiameng, was very important and should not be underestimated. Lu Chen and the others were a little surprised and stood up one after another. Shuang walked in and nodded to Old Ma and White Lotus. Then her gaze fell on Lu Chen. After looking him up and down, she said, "Are your injuries healed, Lu Chen?" Lu Chen nodded and said, "I'm almost healed. Thank you for your care, Hallmaster Shui." Shuang shook her head and said, "It's all thanks to Lord True Monarch that you can recover so quickly. I don't dare to take advantage of you." As she spoke, she walked over and gestured for the others to sit down. She casually pulled over a stool and sat in front of Lu Chen. She said, "But I still didn't think that Lord True Monarch would value you so much." Lu Chen's heart moved, but his expression did not change much. He only smiled and said, "Hallmaster Shui is too polite. I'm just a small character. They're all dead. Lord True Monarch's kindness only saved my life once." Shui Ying's expression seemed a little strange. She stared at Lu Chen for a while with deep meaning in her eyes. Then she said calmly, "I came here especially for you. Pack your things and come with me. The disciple acceptance ceremony will be held in 3 days. Come with me to Heavenly Dragon Mountain." Lu Chen was startled. Before he could speak, White Lotus, who was beside him, interrupted in surprise, "Disciple acceptance? Who wants to accept a disciple? What's going on?" Everyone looked at her and saw that this young girl was frowning slightly. Her eyes were wide open and her face was slightly pale. She looked like she had suddenly become agitated. However, the few people present were all experienced individuals with sharp eyes. With a single glance, they could tell that for some unknown reason, Bai Lian's beautiful face suddenly seemed to be filled with fear. In fact, there was even a sliver of despair. Chapter 463. The room immediately became quiet. Lu Chen, Old Ma, and Shuang all had strange expressions on their faces. Everyone looked towards White Lotus at the same time. White Lotus, after losing her composure for a moment, quickly noticed the expressions of the others. She was startled for a moment and the expression on her face also stiffened. After a while, she quickly regained her composure. After forcing a smile, she said to everyone, "This is a great joyous occasion. How come I've never heard of it? You, Lu Chen, actually keeping your mouth shut. I've never heard you mention it before." Although this beautiful girl was trying her best to smooth things over, the reluctance in her expression still fell into everyone's eyes. However, they naturally could not say anything. Not long after, White Lotus found an excuse to leave. Shuang seemed indifferent to this. Although White Lotus was beautiful and moving, it could not possibly affect a girl like her. Instead, when she saw that Lu Chen and Old Ma's expressions were somewhat strange, she even smiled and asked in a seemingly profound manner, "What, do you feel sorry for them?" "Of course not." Old Ma was the first to bluntly deny it. He said, I just find it strange that she suddenly became like this. We didn't offend her just now. Shuang snorted and turned to look at Lu Chen. She said, don't tell me that you don't know in your heart. Lu Chen hesitated for a moment. He frowned slightly and said, is she also interested in that position? It can't be to this extent, right? Sitting to the side, old Ma's expression changed. Shuang, on the other hand, said indifferently, why not? That is the title of a true sovereign's direct disciple. It is like a protective talisman. It is a guarantee that one can rampage through the world and have a bright future. Who doesn't want it? Old Ma seemed to understand the meaning behind these two words. After a moment of silence, he said, but doesn't she already have that identity? Shuang retorted, can the dead compare to the living? Of course, they could not compare. Everyone knew the answer to this, and the three people present were all clear-minded people, so they could naturally think of this point. However, there was a deeper meaning. Old Ma did not ask, and Shuang did not say. In the end, it was Lu Chen who sighed with a helpless look on his face. He shook his head slightly, smiled bitterly, and said, it turns out that she really wants Tianlan to be her teacher. Since this topic was brought up by Lu Chen, Shuang no longer had any misgivings. She coldly said, originally, we didn't think that at such a young age, she could actually be so. She was probably too embarrassed to say something like, shameless. Shuang snorted and changed the topic. Lord True Monarch took her in back then and announced it to the world. Naturally, she had some use for it. However, I didn't think that she could actually forget her teacher's kindness so quickly and want to climb higher. At this point, the meaning was already very clear. Shuang obviously thought that after her teacher, Hakushin Jinkuan, died, White Lotus had instantly forgotten her teacher's kindness in raising her. She even disregarded the unclear relationship between True Monarch Tianlan and Hakushin Jinkuan's death and tried in vain to become True Monarch Tianlan's disciple again. As for True Monarch Tianlan taking her in and not killing her, of course, it was to show the world that he had nothing to do with Hakushin Jinkuan's death. I've already taken in that senior brother's little disciple, am I not afraid of raising a tiger in my bosom? Besides, isn't it too much for me to plot and kill senior brother Bai Chen? That was the gist of it. Before this, both Lu Chen and Old Ma felt that White Lotus was a precocious and abnormally intelligent girl. They had imagined many of her reactions and even felt that she might endure humiliation and cultivate to great success in the future. Then, she would find an opportunity to kill True Monarch Tianlan. They wouldn't be surprised. However, they really didn't expect that White Lotus actually didn't seem to take Hakushin Jinkuan's kindness as a master seriously. It was as if she was really looking forward to becoming True Monarch Tianlan's disciple. Old Ma glanced at Lu Chen and asked, when you were on Mount Kunlun, did you see White Lotus and Hakushin Jinkuan not get along? Lu Chen shook his head and said, no. At that time, she was very arrogant and only spoke of her identity as the True Monarch's disciple with pride. Old Ma was speechless. Beside him, Shuang stood up with a frown and said, all right, let's not talk about this nonsense. Lu Chen, the True Monarch has indeed decided to accept you as a disciple and has decided to make a grand event. In addition to announcing it to the world, he will also invite 5 other True Monarchs of the Immortal Alliance to witness it in the main hall of Mount Tianlong's Fuyunji. At the same time, he will announce your past achievements. Old Ma and Lu Chen were shocked at the same time. Old Ma was anxious and asked in surprise, Hall Master, do you mean that Lu Chen's past deeds in the devil cult will also be mentioned? Shuang nodded and said, yes. Old Ma was speechless while Lu Chen sat in the distance without moving. After a while, he said in a low voice, are you all afraid that I won't die quickly enough? What he did in the devil cult was certainly a great achievement for the righteous path and Zhengxianmeng, but for the devil cult, it was a blood feud. So much so that he had to hide his name for more than 10 years after the Battle of the Desolate Valley. He was afraid that the devil cult would madly pursue and kill him for revenge. Now, in the disciple acceptance ceremony, once this matter was made public, needless to say, the devil cult would immediately know that the only successor of true monarch Tianlan was the traitor who destroyed the god-subduing mantra. One must know that Elder Ghost was not dead yet. No one knew how many remaining evildoers there were in the devil cult, how many hidden masters there were, and how many madmen there were. Xueying of course also understood the crux of this. So at this time, the gaze she looked at Lu Chen gradually softened. No matter what, although she was very envious of such a hot position, she really did not dare to sit on it so openly. This is true monarch's intention. Xueying slowed down her tone and said to Lu Chen with a hint of comfort, "Before I went down the mountain, true monarch specially asked me to come over and explain this to you." His original words were, as his disciple and the successor of the Tian character Taoist name in Kunlun, "These are all small difficulties, nothing to him." Lu Chen snorted and said, "He is a deity realm true monarch, naturally it is nothing to him." Xueying ignored the resentment in Lu Chen's words. She just coughed lightly and said, "He also said, either you are afraid, don't go up the mountain to be his disciple, leave the immortal city, and never appear in front of him again, or you deal with everything yourself. If you die in the hands of the devil cult's evildoers in the future, it is because you are useless." Lu Chen's expression was indifferent. After a while, he stood up and said, let's go up the mountain." Old Ma wanted to say something but stopped. He stretched out his hand as if he wanted to stop him, but in the end, his hand fell down powerlessly. A trace of a smile appeared on Xueying's face. But when Lu Chen walked past Xueying, his footsteps suddenly paused, then he turned to look at Xueying. After a while, he suddenly said, "In those words just now, you probably added some oil to the fire, right?" He said indifferently, "Although I always scold that Baldy for being shameless and a bastard, that person would never say such heartless words to me." As he said this, he ignored Xueying's suddenly somewhat stiff expression and walked past her. Chapter 464. On Mount Tianlong, inside the Kunlun Hall. This palace was the residence of perfected Lord Tianlan on Mount Celestial Dragon. As the residence of a divine transformation realm perfected lord who stood at the peak of the human cultivation world, this palace was built in a lofty and magnificent manner, which matched perfected Lord Tianlan's towering and burly appearance. From afar, he looked like a legendary giant overlooking the mortal world. As for the name, Kunlun, needless to say, it was naturally from true Lord Tianlan's own sect, the Kunlun party. Over the years, countless people had flattered true Lord Tianlan here, saying that he did not forget his roots, that he cared about his hometown and sect, and that he was truly a person with true feelings. Of course, such treatment was only given to perfected Lord Tianlan alone. If it was any other person, everyone would probably say something along the lines of, "This lad is stupid and disrespectful, going against the sect. How can anyone use the sect's name as the name of their residence? Damn it, damn it, damn it, damn it." Not far from the Kunlun Hall was the main hall of Fuyunji. The two halls were over 100 feet apart, and they echoed each other. The Fuyunji Hall looked a bit shorter than the Kunlun Hall, and there seemed to be some meaning behind it. Lu Chen, Old Ma, and Xueying walked past the Fuyunji Hall, and continued to the Kunlun Hall at the back. Lu Chen looked up and saw that there was no common hall plaque hanging in front of the hall. Instead, in the empty space 10 feet in front of the hall's main entrance, there was a huge boulder that had been moved from somewhere, sitting there like a small mountain. On top of it were two large words, Kunlun. When they got closer, Lu Chen's eyes fell on the two words. He saw that the handwriting on the stone was like iron and silver hooks, bold and powerful, especially at the end of the writing, which was deep and intense, as if it was going to break through the stone and leave, which was amazing. He took a few more glances and saw that there were only these two words on the stone, but no signature. He asked Old Ma, who was walking beside him, who wrote these two words. Before old Ma could answer, Xueying, who was walking in front, had already turned around and replied, "This was written by Lord True Monarch himself." Old Ma was startled when he saw Xueying's expression from the side. He realized that although this woman's face was calm, there was a hint of worry in her eyes. Her gaze was also fixed on Lu Chen. Lu Chen replied with an "oh" and nodded slightly. However, he did not look at Xueying and continued to walk forward. When he walked past Xueying, she seemed to have something to say, but after opening her mouth, she hesitated. In the end, she followed him without saying a word. Not long after, the three of them arrived outside the Kunlun Palace. Someone on the side reported in, and soon after, Lord True Monarch Tianlan's decree was passed down, inviting them inside to meet. After passing through the thick and heavy palace door that was about 7 or 8 people tall, they arrived at the vast and magnificent main hall. 9 giant pillars supported the dome and were carved with clouds and mist-coiling dragons. In front of the main hall, on a tall white jade lotus throne, Lord True Monarch Tianlan was sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed, resting on his wide sleeves and shiny hair. When they raised their heads and looked up, that person was solemn and solemn, like a god, causing people to involuntarily feel a sense of reverence and worship. When Xueying and old Ma arrived, they both wore deep and respectful expressions, prostrating long ago under the throne. Only Lu Chen glanced at the half-human half-god figure on the lotus throne, then turned his gaze away with an indifferent expression. He walked to the side of a stone pillar and carefully looked at the carvings on it. "Since you've come here, why don't you kneel before me?" A deep voice that sounded like thunder suddenly rang out in the palace, rumbling like thunder. It was as if a god was speaking, causing people to revere it. Xueying and old Ma's bodies trembled slightly, their heads lowered even more, and there was a faint look of fear on their faces. For some reason, in this Kunlun palace, Lord True Monarch Tianlan's aura was many times stronger than usual. Moreover, following his voice, the entire palace seemed to be resonating with him, as if this incomparably powerful true monarch had already become one with this towering and majestic palace, transforming into a true god, looking down on the insignificant ants of the human world. The only exception was probably Lu Chen. Perhaps, he was a stubborn ant. In such a situation, Lu Chen did not seem to be affected by the true monarch's aura at all. He only waved his hand and did not even turn his head. There was even a hint of impatience in his tone as he said, "You haven't acknowledged me as your master yet. It won't be too late to kneel after you've acknowledged me as your master." On the lotus throne, Lord True Monarch Tianlan suddenly opened his eyes. At that moment, there seemed to be endless surging waves in the depths of his eyes, as if the world was spinning and there was a violent storm. He looked like a god or a demon. In the quiet palace, there seemed to be thunder and lightning exploding in the silence. The atmosphere was terrifying, as if it was about to freeze one's blood. After a moment, the terrifying demon-like light and shadow retracted into his eyes. Lord True Monarch Tianlan blinked and chuckled, "Oh, that's fine too." After casually asking a few questions, Lord True Monarch Tianlan ordered Xueying and old Ma to leave first. After the two of them left the Kunlun Palace, they walked all the way to the side of the huge boulder with the words, Kunlun, carved on it. Only then did they both heave a sigh of relief, feeling the terrifying pressure that had been pressing down on their hearts slowly recede. The two of them looked at each other with reverence on their faces. Old Ma sighed and said with lingering fear, "I don't know why, but every time I come here to have an audience with Lord True Monarch, I always feel uneasy. I'm especially reverent towards Lord True Monarch." Xueying seemed to have the same feeling. However, her cultivation was high and she was shrewd, so she quickly regained her composure. However, there was still a trace of anxiety in her eyes. She turned back to look at the palace. At the side, old Ma coughed and said, "Hall Master, don't worry. Lu Chen is not a talkative person. He knows what he should say and what he shouldn't say." Xuang turned back to look at old Ma and raised her eyebrows slightly. Really? Old Ma said frankly, I've known him for many years. Other than Lord True Monarch, there shouldn't be anyone in the world who knows him better than me. Xuang slowly nodded. Although she didn't say anything, her expression clearly showed that she was relieved. Old Ma secretly cursed in his heart. However, in the face of this powerful woman, he was not like Lu Chen. He was still tactful. He immediately changed the topic with a smile. Then, he hinted that before he came, he had already discussed it with Lu Chen and so on. What happened before was just a misunderstanding. Of course, it must be that Lu Chen's brain was stiff and he inexplicably misunderstood Hall Master. In short, everything was that idiot Lu Chen's fault. Hall Master, you don't have to worry. Xuang was very happy after hearing this. When she looked at old Ma again, she immediately felt that he was more pleasing to the eye. She nodded slightly and said, I didn't realize before that you were also a capable person. If you have time in the future, come visit me more often. Perhaps I can be of help to you. Old Ma laughed and hurriedly cupped his hands in thanks. Then, the two of them talked and laughed harmoniously, looking like old friends who had known each other for many years. At the same time, in the solemn Kunlun Great Hall, Lord True Monarch Tianlan, who was sitting on the throne, glared angrily. He looked as terrifying as a demon god. He said to Lu Chen below, Hey, why are you so insensible? There were outsiders here just now. Why can't you give me some face? Bullsh**T. Lu Chen turned around rudely and looked at the damn baldy. He scolded, Didn't you tell me when I was young that the 9 dragons' Dharma bodies Tao, magic, and divine sense was a trick of a Jianghu swindler? Now you're actually using it? Lord True Monarch Tianlan coughed and said seriously, Later on, I found that this thing was quite useful, so I used it for a while. What's wrong with that? Lu Chen sneered and looked disdainful. Then, he said angrily, You're too unkind. You said that you wanted to take me as your disciple and announced to the world that you would let me reach the heavens in a single step. But in fact, you're putting me on a fire to roast. You're probably afraid that I won't die, right? You still want me to respect you and bow down to you? Scram! Lu Chen looked very annoyed as he scolded the Divine Transformation Realm True Monarch. You're tuning in to the Unparalleled SwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.